Now it's probably 9.
Need a mic. There you go. Okay, at this time, I'd like to call the public meeting for the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission into session. This is day 2, and it is, excuse me, it's Tuesday, November 15th. If I take a roll call real quick, Commissioner Doobie.
Here.
Commissioner Byrd. Right, Commissioner Byrd.
Bird tweet.
Okay, are you there, Galen? Give just a minute. Get one more.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, are we just taking a roll call? Commissioner Brokaw.
Here.
Commissioner Ladwig.
Here.
Commissioner Jolovich.
Here.
Commissioner Lundvall.
Here.
And I'm
Can you hear
Commissioner
me?
Roberts. We have a quorum. We can proceed. At this time, if I get everybody to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. For those watching on via Zoom, if you did not send in an advanced comment sheet prior to the start of the meeting, but would still like to comment on an agenda item, please do one of the following. If you are on Zoom via your computer, you can send a chat to the host with your name and the agenda item you wish to comment on. If you are listening on the phone, you can send an email to wgfvideo@yo.gov, making sure to include your name, phone number you're calling from, and the agenda item you wish to comment on. After each agenda item, we will take public comment on the agenda item. We will first hear from those who submitted their advance comment sheet. If you did not send in an advance comment sheet prior to the start of the meeting, but would still like to make a comment on the agenda item, you can do one of the following. If you are on Zoom via your computer, you can send a chat to the host with your name and the agenda item you wish to comment on. If you are listening on phone, you can send an email to the WGFVIDEO@wyoming.gov, making sure to include your name, phone number you're calling from, the agenda item you wish to comment on. When your name is called, you will be promoted to the host to the role of panelist. Once you have re-entered the meeting as a panelist, you will be able to unmute your microphone and turn on your video if you wish to speak to the commission. That said, that we ran a little late last night, but today we'll take up item number 16 first, I believe. So.
Okay. Let's wait to get the presentation up here.
All right. President Roberts, members of the commission, Director Nesvik. This morning, the Lands Branch has one item on the agenda for land acquisition to be approved. We're really excited about this property. This is the Ellis Sheep Ranch Company property. I'll be referring to it as the Ellis Ranch throughout this presentation. We're really excited about what this property offers to the commission with better access in an area of the state that we're having issues getting access to in the Sheridan region. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, just ask them whenever. So the Ellis Ranch is located in Washakie and Johnson counties, just off of Hazelton Road, which runs north to south between Armento at US Highway 2026, running north to US Highway 16. The property consists of 2,640 deeded acres with an additional 1,264 acres of BLM lease. Now, the property is pretty high in elevation at around 7,500 feet. So it's great habitat for elk and mule deer. It's located just west of the commission's Edo Taylor WHMA as well. And I'll show that the proximity of the two properties on the next slide. The property will improve access to about 4,000 acres of government property between Hazelton Road and the Edo Taylor WHMA. And it will also provide additional access to about 640 acres of BLM property that's currently landlocked. So we're really excited about that too. So I'll provide some more details on the upcoming slides. So here's the map that shows the proximity of Ellis Ranch highlighted in blue, and then the Edo Taylor WHMA that was currently in place in red. So you can see they're fairly close together. And so right here's Ellis, here's Edo Taylor. And as you can see, there's a lot of government, everything in yellow is BLM property located in between there. And then up here in the top is about 640 acres of BLM property that is currently landlocked, that we'll gain access to with this acquisition. And then Hazelton Road runs north to south right along this side. Okay, this next slide just shows Ellis Ranch up close. So you can see the topography of the property itself. Once again, here is Hazelton Road running along the side over here on the west side of the property. A few things I want to point out on this map too. Right here in the middle is a 40-acre parcel that the Ellis family is planning to hold on to. They've asked to keep a hold of that for their family to use. And so we agreed to allow them to do that. As part of that agreement, we have a first right of refusal on that 40-acre parcel. In case they ever decide to sell it, we'll have the option to purchase it first. Also, as part of our agreement, we'll grant the Ellis family an access road to their 40-acre parcel, so they have legal access to their parcel. And they will grant us an easement across that 40-acre piece because there's an existing road that runs along there to the east side of the property over here. And this is where the two creeks, the stream and the creek on the property converge. So that's a really good spot. We want to have the public to be able to get across there. I also want to point out on here, there's a patrol cabin currently in place right over here. So for maintenance activities and patrol activities in the area, it'll help us to have a patrol cabin really close to the property. On this map too, I want to point out that Sullivan Creek runs northwest to southeast across the property up here. And then the middle fork of the Powder River runs along the southern edge of the property down here.
Is that Soldier Creek? Is that what it is?
Middle fork of the Powder River and then Sullivan Creek.
Okay.
And then as I go through some of the pictures here, I want to point out that this up here is where I'll refer to as a northern ridge. And this down here right in the middle is the middle ridge of the property. And everything kind of slopes down towards the middle fork of the Powder River down here, just for reference. So I want to start off by talking about the big game information on the property. The property is located in Elk Hunt Area 33, which is a high priority for the department. The property also has a calving area on the northern portion of the property. And we have some maps that show that that's where calving happens in the area. And then in our tour of the property back in June, the Ellis family was there for the tour, and they explained they've seen the elk calving in that area as well. So we have verification that there is calving on the property. It's located in Deer Hunt Area 163, which is a priority habitat area, and also in the upper Powder River Mule Deer Initiative area. And the property also includes populations of pronghorn, black bear, and mountain lion. So this first picture I have These pictures were taken in June and October, and I think it'll be fairly obvious which one's which. This is very green in June. So this was taken from the northern ridge of the property looking towards the middle ridge of the property. And Sullivan Creek runs down through the valley right down here. And this is the area where the elk calving happens on the property. And it looked great in June, very, very green and beautiful out there. This next picture was taken in October. This is taken from just north of the 40-acre parcel the Ellis family is planning to hold on to. And it's looking northeast towards the northern ridge on the property. And once again, Sullivan Creek runs down this valley right down here. It's kind of hard to see in this picture, but along this plain, there's little ponds, spring-fed ponds along here. And in October, there was still water in those ponds. And as you know, a lot of the ponds on the property had water in October as well. So those springs are running, sounds like year round in most years. This next picture was taken from the middle ridge on the property looking north towards the northern ridge. Once again, Sullivan Creek running down the valley right here. I also wanted to point out that there's an access road running up this northern ridge right here. We took side-by-sides up that access road. Is very, very steep, pretty rugged terrain out there. But there is, in just a minute, I'll show where that road crosses Sullivan Creek as well. And we think there's some opportunities for better access, work on some of those roads for better access as well as time goes on. Next, I want to talk about some water resources on the property. So as I mentioned before, both Sullivan Creek and the Middle Fork of the Powder River cross the property. So this acquisition will provide new fishing opportunities on Sullivan Creek, which is currently private and you can't fish on. And also the Middle Fork of the Powder River is a blue ribbon trout stream, which is classified as having 5,000 catchable trout per mile. And a few people I've talked to said this is a great fishing area. The Middle Fork has great fishing in it. And so we're looking forward to having good access to it. We currently have access to a portion of the Middle Fork of the Powder River, but in order to get down to it, you have to come off of Hazelton Road. There's a little parking area right there, and you have to really hike a long ways up along that stream to get to fishing areas along there. And so we think there's opportunities for better access roads down to the Middle Fork in order to do some fishing. You know, families can get down there and fish as well. So that may be something in the future if we have the funding for it. The property also includes 32 springs permitted through the state engineer's office. Most of those springs are located on the northern ridge of the property and the middle ridge of the property. And most of them have little ponds on them and stuff. So just really great habitat for wildlife. So this picture here was taken of Sullivan Creek. This is also in June. We saw a lot of brook trout in this creek right there. And as you can see, there's a 2-track road that crosses the creek right here. And this is where that access road that came down the northern ridge crosses Sullivan Creek. This next picture shows the Middle Fork of the Powder River. And we're kind of high in elevation when we drove down there, and this is we kind of looked down off a cliff at the Powder River running down through the bottom of here. But this location is probably not the best to get down to the Middle Fork, but there's other places east and west of here. We think there's great locations to get down there for better fishing access. Then just here's one of the ponds, spring-fed ponds on the property. This is really close to the 40-acre parcel that the Ellis family is keeping. As you can see, the water's spilling off the side of this, running down the hillside. There's a lot of marshy area out here. Just, like I said, really great habitat for wildlife. So we'll talk about the management plan as well. So the plan right now is to create a new wildlife habitat management area that's open to the public for hunting and fishing. The property is currently leased for grazing through June of 2023. We plan to continue to allow grazing on the property past that date. And we'll plan to work with the grazer to ensure there's plenty of habitat and forage for wildlife over the winter time too, because that's one of the main reasons we want to purchase this property, is to ensure there's habitat for wildlife. We think there's potential for wildlife friendly fence conversions on the property as well. And a lot of this will have to do with what the neighboring landowners are running on their properties too. If they're running sheep, then we will have to keep the sheep fence up there. But if they're running cattle, there's a chance we could switch over to more wildlife friendly fencing. And then, as I mentioned before, we think there's potential for road improvements for better access to the fishing areas on the property too. So we'll talk about the terms of the sale. The property was originally listed on the MLS for 3.6 million. And I think that was listed around September of 2021. We negotiated the price down to 3.45 million, or about $1,300 per deeded acre. We had an appraisal completed supporting that price, and I want to give kudos to the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. We had some issues getting an appraiser on staff in the time frame we needed to get that appraisal completed, and so they reviewed the project and felt like it was a great project for their mission statement as well, and so they kicked in the money for the appraisal, and we got it done on time. So I appreciate RMEF for what they did on that. And upon approval, we plan to close on the property by the end of November. So in closing, we feel like this is a great addition to the Game and Fish Commission's property. It checks a lot of the boxes of what we're looking for. We've had a lot of issues trying to find better access in the Sheridan region. It's just a hard area to get landowners to cooperate on. So this is just a great project to just gain that access right off the bat in this area. And we feel like this area is great. It's in the Sheridan region, but I think we feel like a lot of people can come up from Casper and the surrounding areas and hunt there as well, hunt and fish there. And it's also an opportunity to manage elk and deer populations in a crucial area and protect the property from development as well. And I also just want to mention that the last WHMA that we purchased was the Spence and Moriarty WHMA in 1991. So it's been a long time since we purchased property like this. And then we also put the property out for public comment. And we got 2 comments back, one of which was just asking where the property was at. The other comment was very positive towards the acquisition. Basically, the commentee said they wanted to make sure there wasn't too much grazing on it, so that there's plenty of habitat for wildlife. But everything else has been positive. So that's all I have. Are there any questions about the property?
Beautiful piece of land. Beautiful piece.
Yeah, President Roberts. I just want to thank the Ellis family for involving us and getting us involved in this beautiful piece of property. It's going to be a wonderful addition for the public and the people of that area. It's gorgeous country. I encourage anybody to go down in that country and look it over because it's unique type stuff and close to the hole in the wall and all that famous stuff. And I think the local community is looking forward to us being good neighbors with grazing interests and other around the area. So I want to make sure that the neighbors know that we're not there to create a national park. So I appreciate it.
I think it's zealous. Anybody would like to. The Ellises want to say anything? Would you like to come up and say? We'd sure like to hear from you.
Say too much, except we really appreciate you guys considering this. It's a generational change for Ellis Sheep Company. And we just didn't want to have that property locked up, whatever you want to say. And so this is a great solution for us. And I think it's a great solution for Wyoming citizens in general.
Well, we appreciate that. Like Commissioner Doobie said, it's absolutely, we will do our best to steward the land and make you guys proud. And that's the department will guarantee that. So thank you.
Make a motion to approve the Ellis property purchase.
It's motion is made by Commissioner Doobie, seconded by Commissioner Brokaw to approve the acquisition of the Ellis property. Any discussion, or do we just vote? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to. You can go Yellowtail now.
Pretty cool looking.
Sure.
place. Yeah.
Keep Sean up here.
Okay, good. John will do Yellowtail.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be filling in for Brad Sorensen today. He's back to Cody to work on some things for us there. Be presenting the Yellowtail Wildlife Habitat Management Area Farming Plan for approval. That includes an area improvement project agreement with a local farmer there to carry out the irrigation and farming of the area, or two farmers in this instance. The Yellowtail Wildlife Habitat Management Area is located 6 miles east of Lovell and comprises almost 20,000 acres of total property. That's a combination of game and fish property, National Park Service, U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and BLM. Of the almost 20,000 acres, the commission holds 1,219 of those acres in fee title, and this area was established in the early 1960s. So Yellowtail is one of the largest cottonwood riparian systems in the state and supports a diversity of wildlife species. It's probably best known for its pheasant hunting, but it's also a good place for waterfowl and other species. So the general objective of this farm plan is to provide a year-round habitat for waterfowl, upland game birds, other game and non-game species to provide fishing, hunting, and recreational use of the wildlife there. The irrigated farming operations are designed to provide a mixture of legumes, grasses, and grains to provide forage and cover over the winter. A balance of grain and hay has proven to be a crop mix that provides forage for wildlife, as well as being of interest for local farmers to actually participate in the program. So there are a total of 836 acres available for farming on the WHMA. 694 of those acres are production farmland, and the remaining 142 acres are planted in permanent cover for food plots. So again, there's a mixture there. The farming objective is to have approximately 60% of that farm ground in irrigated acres, or of the irrigated acres in alfalfa, grass hay, or new rotational alfalfa hay with grain cover crop, and 40% planted in grains or permanent cover food plots. So here's a general map of the northern part of the unit. As you can see, there's farm fields on the eastern side of that portion, as well as one on the west. And the boundary between what we're calling the northern Yellowtail WHMA and the southern portion is the Shoshone River, and that borders a railroad track that runs between the middle of the property as well. So that's the distinction between the north and south. Here's a close-up view of the eastern portion of the northern side and the western. Here's a picture of one of the farm fields in production. And then a map of the southern farm fields. So we have those broken out and shown with the objective of working with the contract farmer to do a 10% crop leave behind on the rotational farming. So essentially the agreement is that we would have the farmer leave 10% of the crop behind as part of that area improvement project agreement. Here's another photo of one of the crop fields. So in conclusion, what the Habitat and Access Group will do is essentially either do one or two agreements for the north and south portion of Yellowtail. So it could be one farmer that ends up with the agreement on both portions of the WHMA, or it could be two, depending on how those requests for proposals go. So the lease period will begin in 2023 and run for a period of 10 years with an option to renew for an additional 10 years, depending on the success of the cooperative agreement. So again, the way the lessee will make payments essentially to the commission or the department will be through that 10% leave behind of their crop for cover and forage for wildlife. In addition to that, they're responsible for irrigating the property. So this time we'll take any questions, but we're requesting that the commission approve the farming plan for the yellowtail WHMA and to move forward with the selection of a contract farmer through the area improvement project agreement, excuse me.
Well, first, I want to apologize to Brad. He's been here all day. I still feel bad about, I didn't see, I'd have plowed through yesterday to get him on to do it, but yeah, Brad, if you're listening or whatever, I apologize that we didn't get you on, and we had to have second fiddle to give us to us today, but that's okay. But
We got him home yesterday, so he's okay.
okay, good.
Yeah.
Any questions or? Okay, what I'll be looking for that be asked to somebody to motion the department's proposal for farming on the Yellowtail Wildlife Habitat Management Area. Jolovich
So moved.
would be moved by Commissioner Jolovich, seconded by
Ralph,
Commissioner Ralph,
sorry.
and
Still
and all those in favor,
Aye.
all those opposed, it carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, and we'll go ahead and move to Jennifer. You got, you want? Number eight.
Good morning, Commission President, members of the Commission, Director Nesvik. I'm here to present Chapter 44, the regulation governing the issuance of license permits, stamps, regulations, preference points, and competitive raffle chances. Very long title. So I'm going to walk through this fairly quickly. There's probably 4 or 5 substantial changes to this regulation, but you'll see a lot of red lines in here. A lot of that is cleanup or things that were deemed unnecessary as they were identified in other regulations, or language throughout this regulation that didn't necessarily need to be in place in multiple spots. So as we walk through on the first page, the section 2 is unnecessary. The definition of the regulation was deemed unnecessary. When we get to the new section 2, there's multiple definitions in here that are either deleted because they're in another regulation, or the language is either self-explanatory or otherwise already defined. So that pertains to application fee, documentary evidence, landowner applicant's immediate family, person's privilege to obtain licenses has been revoked or suspended by a court order or the wildlife violator compact, and unable to use the license for good cause. There are several others in here that were moved. If you look at completed application, we moved that to section 3 when we talk about applications. Also, the definition of disabilities was removed because it is included in the chapter 35 commission regulation that you approved at the previous commission meeting. So it was no longer necessary to have it in chapter 44. As we just flip through the definitions, the rest of those are ones that I had identified as self-explanatory or unnecessary. So the next major change we get to in chapter 44 is on page 9 under the new section 4, subsection E. Depredation is also changed to the new regulation, chapter 34, auxiliary management hunting seasons, which was also a regulation that you guys approved at the prior commission meeting. So this just puts this chapter 44 in line with the commission chapter 34 that you approved in September. The next couple of pages, when we get to the new section 4, which is license issuance, this is one of those major changes. All of these, a lot of this language applies to the commission or excuse me, the legislative 2022 session, House Enrolled Act 10, which was to change the allocation of moose, sheep, bison, mountain goat, and grizzly bear to 90-10, which was approved and came out of the Wildlife Task Force. So a lot of that language was necessary to implement in chapter 44 based on House Enrolled Act 10. On page 10, this deals with the antelope event hunts that we discussed yesterday that you approved. This is really cleanup language from the prior year where we brought it to the commission to identify how we were going to take applications to the public, and that timeframes that had to be very specific in the regulation during that transitional period. And so we are just removing the actual identification of the prior awardees of those antelope hunt events and just taking out dates that no longer are valid because they expired in like 2019 or for the 2020 season. On page 11, subsection B, there's language in there for our 50 antelope licenses to individuals with disabilities. This matches exactly the statute reference in 23-17058. So that's just additional language to match that statute. And as we walk through a lot of them on the next page is what I said, we were implementing the 90-10. So 90% of licenses will go to residents, 10% will go to non-residents. For moose, bighorn sheep, wild bison, mountain goat, and grizzly bear are identified throughout this section. The next major change in chapter 44 is on page 15. And this is clarifying language to clarify how the current non-resident elk draw is conducted. So you'll see a large strike through of elk and then new language. And this simply clarifies the language of how the draw is currently done. And this language is what is important because this is how the non-resident elk draw will also be conducted in 2023. So while you heard from Doug yesterday on kind of the change and moving forward with the 7250, that's for an upcoming going through the process. We need this language in place to clarify the current processes for the non-resident elk draw, which will be valid in 2023. So this language clarifies that language as to how the draw is currently conducted. And so today when you vote, you will be voting to approve this language, which clarifies how the draw is currently conducted, as well as how it will be conducted in the 2023 season.
And I think that making that very clear to everybody is so there's no repercussions. Thank you.
Commissioner President, you're welcome. It's kind of a little challenging because we're talking about 7250 in realms of how we're going to proceed, how the commission is going to move forward and the department's going to take that regulation, but we still operate under the current for the 2023 season. So definitely want to clarify how we conduct the draw.
Thank you.
When we move to page 21, there's some language in here once again on the central visual acuity disability, and this is to conform and align with the recent regulation changes made to chapter 35 at the prior commission meeting. You will see two changes, one under the governor's licenses and then under the super tag languages. So the first change is on 26, and this changes the bighorn sheep, moose, and bison. Previously, there was regulation that said those licenses weren't valid in hunt areas with either less than 8 or 10. And now we are being consistent with 10, and that kind of aligns with the 90-10, that a lot of those areas will have multiples of 10 instead of the 8. So the language in the governors and the super tag is consistent in both of these to accommodate that change. So you'll see that change in two sections in the regulation. The next major change is the new section 12. This is the commission complimentary licenses for persons with life-threatening illness. And the change here is to allow for the commission to have 50 antelope licenses, 50 elk, 50 deer, and 50 wild turkey. The prior was 25. And several years now, probably 4 or 5 years, depending on the species, we've had to go back to the commission president because we've had more requests at the beginning of the year than that 25. And so this would just increase that number to allow those organizations to request higher numbers to work with those youth life threatening. When we get done with the season and the number of licenses that we actually issue is usually less than that 25 anyway, but we can't award them and have those organizations start working with their youth and those families unless we have that authorization ahead of time. So this would allow them to go out and start working with those youth and their families above the 25. The next major change you'll see is striking of the old section 17, which was depredation licenses. And this, once again, is not necessary. It's included in the new revised chapter 34 auxiliary management permits. Going forward on page 33 and 34 are our application dates. And here we made several changes to the close dates for the moose, bighorn sheep, wild bison, and mountain goat to align with the modify withdraw date. So all of our other application periods, the modify withdraw date is the same day as the ending application period, with the exception of these 4 species previously. These species either closed February 28th or March 31st, and then they had a modify withdraw period up until April 28th. This change would allow a customer to apply for those applications up until April 15th, excuse me, not April 28th, April 15th, which was the modified date. So this gives them some about a month and a half, some almost 2 months to make decisions and see what the regulations being presented in public meetings are, what those changes would look like. And so with technology and the way we no longer accept paper applications, we're now comfortable with having that modify withdraw date and the application date the same for these species. So you'll see that change of April 15th on page 33 and 34. The next major change is on the reservation of licenses. So starting on page 38, you'll see language that adds for the ability for a sports person licensee to request a reservation of their full price license for elk, deer, antelope, moose, sheep, wild bison. We've added language in here that's consistent with the language for a refund. So previously a customer could get a refund for those full price licenses if they had a death of a licensee's spouse, immediate family, in the case of an incapacitating illness or military, but they couldn't get a reservation for those licenses. So this makes the language consistent for a reservation of the full price licenses with what we would allow for a refund. So the commission had previously approved in 44 all of those allowances for a refund through the license review process. This would allow them to get a reservation of the license if they pay the $10 fee to the next hunting season. So that is a lot of these changes you'll see on page 38 is to make that consistent. Bless you. The other thing, another change that you will see both in the reservation and the refund is identifying when documentation is due to the department if a licensee is going to submit a license review board request for either a reservation or a refund. So just clarifying that language that if the season closes on or before December 31st, all of their paperwork is due by December 31st. If they have a license that has that extended season into January, then the deadline is January 31st. So this language is consistent in both the reservation and the refund portion to make that clear when those deadlines are. We've been getting lots of applications for refunds and getting some of the paperwork in months later, which makes it very challenging to wrap up end of year reporting. The other change to both the reservation and the refunds, you will notice the first change is on page 41 under reservation. And this allows the department to put back up on the first come, first serve any licenses for elk, deer, and antelope that are approved as a reservation into the next hunting season, or the license review board approved a refund and the department has processed that refund. So in an instance where a coveted elk license, the board approved a refund either for a medical through the license review board process or any other reason through the license review board process, or that customer was approved through the license refund review board for a reservation. Once all of the paperwork is done, the department would put that license back up for sale on the first come, first serve, so that that license could be utilized for our sports persons. The department routinely gets asked what happens to all of the licenses that are reserved or refunded each year. And previously, the only time those went back up for sale is if there currently was licenses available. So if we refunded a license and there were still 10 of them, we would add one to that. So we do currently do that if they're available. This would allow the opportunity for elk, deer, and antelope to be resold once approved. In 2021, just for some numbers, we had 140 elk, deer, and antelope licenses that were under the reservation that would go back up for sale. And we had 583 licenses that could potentially go back up for sale. That would mean that we would look to make sure that the season is still open. We're not going to put up licenses that are closed. So those numbers are in total. It would depend on if the season was still open by the time we got the paperwork and it was processed through the license review board. So you will see that change in both the reservation and the refund, and it's only for elk, deer, and antelope. We are not doing anything with reservations or refunds of moose, sheep, goat, bison, those other highly coveted licenses. This only applies to elk, deer, and antelope. So you will see that change as well on page 46 under the reservation. So it's the same language. They would go up for first come, first serve. And then the last change is also that change for super tags that I had previously mentioned with the governor's license to be consistent and moving those to 8 from 8 licenses to a minimum of 10 quota for those licenses to be utilized for governors and super tags. That's all the changes identified in the regulation that I was going to walk through. The department did hold 8 public meetings at each of their regional offices and also had a comment form online. The department did receive 2 comments through the comment form. The first one was in regards to a non-resident commenting on the allocation of bighorn sheep licenses to non-residents, which was identified that the department and commission had to make that change to be in line with House Bill Enrolled Act 10. So that was the change. The other one comment was voicing opposition to potentially moving away from a preference point system for moose and bighorn sheep to the bonus point system. And this is a recommendation from the Wyoming Wildlife Task Force and would require a statute change. So therefore, the department chose to make no changes to Chapter 44 based on this public comment. And with that, I would stand for questions and ask that you approve Chapter 44 as presented, remembering and identifying that one of the major changes as outlining how we continue to process the non-resident elk draw with the 7250.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, that I'll be asking for a motion to approve Chapter 44 as presented on the regulation for issuance of licenses, permits, stamps, tags, preference points, and competitive rifle chances. Buddy. It's moved by Commissioner Lundvall, seconded by Commissioner Jolovich. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? It is approved.
Thank you.
Mhm. Can we go to 12 and 13? Quickly. We figure it's going so smooth, it'll go really quick, right?
Good morning, President Roberts, Director Nesvik, members of the commission. Yes, Eric Voltaire Services Division. I believe this will go quickly. And if you're okay, I'll just go from 12 to 13.
Please.
Unless there's questions, just go ahead and stop me. So number 12, a quick update on the Cody office. I believe this will be the last update that I have to give on Cody because we have moved in. At the beginning of the month, we moved into the office. Got through move-in fairly smoothly. We're working through some issues with the contractor. We did begin serving the public on the 7th, so we're open for business at the new Cody office, at your new Cody office, which you will get a chance tomorrow to see during the open house. As I mentioned, there's a few issues that we're working through still with the contractor and the designer. HVAC seems to be a challenge for us. It's working, it's heating. It cools also, or you can just open the windows, but we'll work through the testing and balancing, and we hope to get a resolution on that sometime soon. It'll be a process, and it has proven to be a process for the commissioning agent and the testing and balancing crew. Also, the elevator, to our surprise, the elevator is complete. However, with today's technology, I don't know if you're aware, but we don't have phone lines in our new offices. But however, in the elevator, you do have to have a phone line, an actual hard line. All of our phones are internet. So with the requirement for code to have a phone line in the elevator, we're going to pull that line hopefully sometime this week to get that requirement met so that there's a phone in the elevator in the event there's a problem. So the elevator is done. However, we're waiting on a phone line to make it fully functional. Few other minor things that we're working through with the contractor, but from what I've heard from the region and from what I've been told so far, everything is going well. There's a few touch-up things that need done, but we're moved in, serving the public, and it's fully functional. So pretty happy about that. So hopefully, if there's no questions, that's my last update for Cody.
I just wanted to thank you for all you and your folks' hard work on this, Lauren and everybody else. It's been challenging, but appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you, Commissioner Doobie. All right, we'll move on to number 13, which is the next big project for the commission, the department, and everybody involved, Jackson Housing. Quick update. As you recall, you've earmarked some money for an employee housing project in Jackson. We have not slow rolled it, but we've had a few hurdles in front of us with getting contracts finished with the construction manager at risk, like I briefed you back in June. We are ready to execute that contract and actually have. I do need commission action today for the amount of $37,500 to firm that contract up with the construction manager at risk and the designer. They will work through a process of doing the actual design with Jorgensen Construction. And at the end of that process, if you recall, I mentioned it to you, we'll get a GMP, a guaranteed maximum price from the construction manager at risk on what the construction of the project will cost us. So that's the action I'm asking for today is $37,500 approval to do the design contract with the construction manager at risk. Really about all I have for an update on Jackson Housing. We have the Jorgensen Construction has completed a lot of things that were needed that were kind of in limbo as far as the geotech services, testing the soils and all that. We're working through trying to decide on septic and all those issues, but really we wanted to get the construction manager at risk on board to start really getting those things rolling. Right now, I think my team has told me that we're about a month behind on where we wanted to be, but we'll catch that up real quick.
How much money did you say?
Yes, President Roberts, $37,500 for the contract execution for the construction manager at risk and Jorgensen to work on design.
And Jorgensen is who we selected.
Jorgensen is, yes, sir.
Any discussion? So what I'd be looking for is a motion to approve spending for $37,500 for the contract. What do you call them?
The construction manager at risk, which is
Construction manager at risk.
yes, sir.
So moved.
It's moved by Commissioner Ladwig,
Second.
by Commissioner Doobie, seconded, and any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? It carries. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, next. Okay, I think we've got Nish for what, 3 in a row or something? Um, when would anybody want a break? Do we want to?
Don't ask me.
I know what you say. I know what you say. Okay, we'll go ahead.
Good morning, Commissioner, President, Commissioners, Director Nesvik. I'm pleased to be here today and to talk to you a little bit about multiple topics. But before I begin, I just want to mention that we're really excited that upon the setting of the commission dates yesterday, that the next time we're back here in Rock Springs for a commission meeting will also be part of a big event that we are doing in partnership with Muley Fanatics for Mule Deer Days. And so I want to just give a little shout out to the Green River region with a special focus to Regina Dixon, who's over here. She's our information and education specialist who's coordinating and planning with Muley Fanatics, and alongside, of course, the education team and whatnot. And also to the Green River Wildlife Supervisor, Todd Graham, who's here, who will be giving a lot of support from their region. So we're really looking forward to this event that focuses on mule deer conservation. And it's an alternative to also our large expo that we used to do to inspire a kid. Not only will there be multiple layers to the event that Muley Fanatics are doing, but there'll be an entire exhibit hall dedicated to just inspire a kid to do education with kids in this region. So we're really looking forward to this and hope it's an annual event. So next, I'd like to talk to you about hunter education. And so I want to give you a little bit of a history and background over this last about year and a half of what the department has done to improve hunter education. Hunter education is a major priority for both the department and for our stakeholders. And so we started with an internal hunter education committee that was cross-divisional, and they went over all of our policies, all of our internal workings, trainings, everything, essentially kind of an internal audit to see what were some of the issues we were having with our hunter education. We had some backlog, which of course, you know, with COVID was another problem as well. We wanted to get more volunteers trained and we wanted to do a better job with implementation. Since then, we rolled out a major platform, online platform called Calcami. And we started that in October with implementation in January, and we're all in on it now. We did trainings across the state. We have all of our hunter education instructors, both department and volunteers, integrated. And now we have a really fantastic way to do online classes, to track our students, our test scores, and really give back some better data that we'll be able to use in the future. So coming to you today to ask for these changes with this policy aligns with all of the work that's been done thus far. One of the other things I want to talk about is that this policy hasn't been updated since 2014. And so some of the stuff you've seen here is cleanup, and then a lot of it is to really integrate all the nuances that we have now and that we're already doing, and then also align with the volunteer policies. So because they do go hand in hand, especially with our hunter ed volunteers. So if we look at and let me just give you a few more data points. So currently we have 368 hunter ed instructors. That includes both department and volunteers. We have a number of other department employees that are certified to be hunter ed instructors, and we're hoping to do more. We're going to get some more department trainings going for our employees so that they can do this. But as of right now, we are also sending out a hunter ed newsletter to all of our instructors, and we know that we have a 96% open rate on that. So they're reading them, which is really exciting. And going forward, now that we have the commission dates set for the following year, we will be bringing in hunter ed instructors who have received awards so that when we're in their area, we can give them some appreciation and some acknowledgement for the work that they've done for the department and for the state. So the first thing I want to talk about is that on the first page, you'll see here that we did a lot of cleanup. We did this cleanup in conjunction with our AG, Jenny, and then also all across the department, and all of our hunter ed instructors have also gone through and reviewed and give feedback and suggestions and modifications. We are also working on overhauling our Hunter Ed manual so that we can have that aligned with updates and all the things that we're doing as well. And we'll be seeing that in January. All of this overhaul that we're working on is in preparation to do more Hunter education in schools as well. And my last piece of data before I get into the policy with you is that this year alone, we've certified over 5,000 students. And that's kind of our norm, is somewhere between, on a non-COVID year, we certified around 4,500 to 5,600. Our highest year is 5,800 in 2013. Our COVID years, we only certified 3,000. And so we did have a backlog, but we have since been through all that. So going forward, we estimate that there's around 8,000 12-year-olds in the state of Wyoming, just based on that demographic in the classrooms and data we received from the Department of Education. So we know we still have more students out there that we would love to get Hunter education certified. So here on the first page, most of this information is just updates, cleanups. The only other thing that I really want to highlight on here is that the department's been doing a lot of work with bow hunters of Wyoming. We know that we have more work to do with them and to do more with bow hunter education. There's a number of other states that are doing combo certifications with their hunter education classes. So you can do hunter education and bow hunter education certification. And so we will be rolling that out. We did our first training with instructors in the state, and we're really looking forward to that as well. On your second page, which is page 2, there's just mostly definitions here. We did some cleanup here just to kind of align things with some of our other policies and standards. On page 3, you'll see a whole lot of red lines. We didn't take all of these paragraphs out. Instead of having all these wordy paragraphs, we put them into a list. So you'll see 1 to 6 at the top that embodies all of those paragraphs, just so that you'll have a listing of what is required to be a hunter ed instructor. At the very bottom of that page, though, we also have something included in there that we want to start talking about volunteer instructors versus employee instructors. And that leads into page 4. We really wanted to make a separate distinction that our employee department instructors are not the same as volunteer instructors. They cannot receive awards. The time they give to hunter education has to be approved from the division chiefs. That is a new change as well on the top of page 4. And that's in order so that we can maintain very much consistency across the state and equity for all of our employees who do give their time to hunter education. The next thing on page 4 is brand new, is the junior volunteer instructor certification. We have been wanting to do this as part of our own grow your own program. So this allows that somebody from the age of 14 and above could assist with hunter education courses. And these are the requirements. We'd like to do this here. This is something that a number of other states are doing as well. And it just gives us an opportunity to further engage with some of our older students who really enjoyed hunter education and want to give back. On page 5, we have some more cleanup as well. One of the other parts that we've been doing, we've actually already implemented in almost all of our classes, is the requirement to have 2 certified volunteer instructors in the class. And so we have all of our hunter ed instructors are doing this minus, I believe, 15. So of those 368, this does not include department employees, and it does not include certified educators. So as we continue to implement more hunter education in class, we recognize that you don't always necessarily need 2 people in the class. This is just a really nice policy that gives a lot of space, especially when you're talking about safety with anything that deals with kids, guns, cash, cars, things like that, firearms. It's always a good policy to have 2 people there. That doesn't mean that 2 people have to be teaching the whole time. Somebody could be doing logistics. We have a number of our hunter ed instructors that are already doing that, where they take the signups at the door, or they're just in the classroom if there's something needed. There's a student that has accommodations, things like that. You'll see at the bottom of page 5, there was a suggested paragraph and we took it out, and that involves student ratio limits. That was something that the education team suggested, but our instructors were quite against it. And so we took that feedback and we eliminated that idea. We were thinking that we would limit class sizes so we'd have a better ratio, but it was brought to our attention that a number of our instructors felt like that whatever they needed to do to serve their communities and the number was something that they wanted to be able to organize themselves. So we took the feedback very seriously. If you look at page 6, there's a change that we're suggesting here in the Hunter Education course for the internet courses only. We're suggesting that for the internet courses, which we utilize a third-party vendor to host, that there be an age requirement of 10-year-olds or older to do the online course. The rationale behind this is that we are not seeing students under the age of 10 years old as successful in this course, and we don't have department oversight of this course. And also this course is intended for a 10-year-old or 4th grade learning age limit. So the next thing down below there, on the traditional and internet certifications, we're asking that the written exam score be raised to 80%. And the rationale from 70% to 80% is because we're one of the lowest in the nation. And so just to give you an example of our Western state neighbors, Alaska's minimum Hunter education test score is 80%, Arizona's 80%, Colorado requires 85% pass rate, Montana 85%, Nebraska 85%, New Mexico is 70%, just like us right now, and 75% for their online. However, they're under review and they're anticipating they're going to raise the score as well. Oregon is 80%, South Dakota is 80%, Utah is 75%, and Washington is the only other one at 70%. So our rationale on this is that we don't want to be the lowest in the nation. We think this is really important. This is a legal certification that we do once and never again. And so having a higher bar and standard is really important to us. Within the department, we create our own test per the International Hunter Education Association's guidelines. So we have an internal committee, which we're gearing up to do again, that creates this test, vets it, and determines the score rate. We didn't come to you today with any suggestion for 75% or somewhere in that 70 higher range because it's a 50 question test. And so it's really hard for us to do that 70% when you're looking at those percentages. So whereas if it would have been 100 question test score, then it's much easier to do that. So we're asking for that change within that area for that reason. Forgive me, I have to jump back to my page. On page 7, as the current policy states, the department is allowed per statute to charge a fee for Hunter education, but we haven't written it out. We hadn't spelled it out in policy. When we entered into the new online software with the vendor Calcami to host our Hunter Ed class scheduling and to collect all of our data, that was one of the contract agreements, is that they could charge a fee to and they send the cards. So we don't have to do that within the department. We can still pull the cards and reissue cards for anybody who's lost them or can't find them, etc. But they're currently charging $5. The standard that was in there, it was that it was possible to charge a student fee, but not to exceed $10. Most of our volunteer instructors are charging a $10 fee. And the reason for that is that we find that if you do charge a fee for something, people show up, and it eliminates, it really deters people from enrolling in multiple classes and holding spots and then not attending. And so we just wanted to solidify what's actually already happening in this policy. And those are all of the proposed changes. If you have questions, please let me know.
Mr. President,
Go ahead.
a question I sometimes get asked, we have basically one certified instructor in our area that's available to do classes, and I get asked to go in and supervise when they're doing the practical side of it, where they take the firearms, the orange firearms outside and stuff. Do I have to be certified to do that, or is it just a parental overseer?
So typically you would have to be certified as well. However, there is the option for exceptions per the Hunter Education Coordinator.
Thank you.
More questions?
Okay, no questions, then I'll be asking for a motion to approve the changes to the hunter education policy as presented. Um, Commissioner Lenval.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Ladwig. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries.
In continuation with number 18, Mr. President, members of the commission, director. This is the volunteer policy. And again, we brought this to you simultaneously with the hunter education policy, just because we have such a high number of volunteer instructors and we wanted these policies to match. I can't thank Jenny, our AG, enough for all the work she did on reviewing these policies. And this policy doesn't have as many changes as the hunter education policy. Truly, we updated the liability and insurance to clarify and strengthen the protection for the agency. We took the driver's license check was removed and just replaced that with background checks, and which is what we currently do. And the record of removed volunteers is included in there. We're currently looking for volunteer management software so that we'll be able to put all of our department volunteers, whether they're here for hunter education or they're here for an event, or they want to help us take down a fence or something else anywhere in the state, be able to have a platform where we can have their information, have it collected, not ask for it every time they come to volunteer with us, and also have a way to connect with them when we need volunteers for different things. And so we also want to be able to track, though, if we do have a volunteer removed for any reason across the department, and have a way to ensure that we don't ask them to come help us out again. So that's in here. We removed the expiration of the volunteer service agreement. As it was stated in here, it had to be redone every 3 years. And that was creating quite a paper backlog for a number of people who are doing the same thing with us. All of our hunter education instructors have to renew their certification anyways within 5 years. So it was kind of a duplication of process for them, especially, and they're our largest number of volunteers. So that's essentially all of the changes within this policy.
We hear a motion to approve the changes to the volunteer policy as presented.
So moved.
Commissioner Jolovich has moved it. Commissioner Brokaw
Second, yeah.
has seconded that. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, President, members of the commission and director. Number 19, I'm here to present as well for you, which is on our department website update. And I'm very excited to tell you about the progress that's being made and all the work that's being done by both the department, especially the IT team in services and with our vendor Open. I have a presentation. The last time I came to you, I talked to you about we were in the build process, definitely in the design process. We were looking at building the wireframes, which I described as likening to, framing your house. You'll know where the rooms are going to be, but not exactly what they look like. At this point, all of the wireframes have been built, and we're finally at the point where I can show you what it's going to look like and how it's going to maneuver and operate. We're not completely done with all of the migration of our data, but we're in the process right now and we're really excited. We are a little bit behind our timeline in this area, but that's not because of anything with the department employees. Our vendor has experienced quite a significant amount of turnover within their agency. And so just to give you an example, we've had, I believe we're on 4 or 5 different project managers from the vendor side. So we've been working really hard to maintain the progress. I can't say enough about the services division and the IT team and all the work they've done, along with the department website committee. It's been a very, very thoughtful and quality focused approach. We're very much looking at delivering the best website for our users. And so this is going to be a nice opportunity to be able to see our department brand standards as well, which we're going to roll out in January. So this is just kind of a nice little snapshot of what the homepage will look like on your computer. Don't worry, I'm going to give you a closer view here in a second, but these colors, the settings, it's even amazing. Within the wireframes, all of the tabs that we had on our current homepage, those are very much were in hot debate, to say the least, of where they should be, what they should say, how the wording should be, even down to, I'll go to the next page. You can see on the top tabs, license and applications, hunting and trapping, fishing and boating, public access, Wyoming wildlife, education and camps. They all had to be at least two lines in the settings of them. As you hover over each of these lines, you'll be able to immediately get a drop down and you'll be able to see everywhere that those tabs can take you. So within the users will have a whole new streamlined navigation that allows them to know anywhere they want to go on the department homepage from this main page. And as you go from the top of our page, you can scroll down to the very bottom and there's more information as well. We've also made sure that this goes above and beyond for accommodations, accessibility, and user access and needs. And we'll even have a Google Translate embedded into this so that we can translate the website into multiple languages as well, which is one of the accommodations we really wanted to make sure we had. And you'll be able to go back from any page you've ever been on. And so the navigation will be far superior to our current page. The search engine will actually search, and you'll be able to, know exactly where you are at any given time. Just to give you some data, last year we served 1.92 million users came to our webpage. We do know that a lot of those are repeat users, of course, but this was really important for us to acknowledge that a lot of people are coming to our website for a lot of different things. Our first consideration for all of these users was definitely in design and ease of access. And so we wanted to make sure that every one of these tabs, as you go down and you click on something, we counted the clicks to know how long it's going to take you, because research shows that the shorter amount of clicks, the more engaged the user is and the quicker they get what they need, the information they're searching for. So here's a nice picture of how our website's going to look like on our mobile devices. Before, our current website right now is not mobile friendly whatsoever. It's really quite difficult. And so the new one will be mobile friendly. You'll be able to buy a license, all of the things from your mobile device. This is really important because we know that of those 1.92 million users that were on our website last year, 62% of them logged on to our website from their mobile device, 36% of them from the desktop, and 2% from others like tablets or other devices. So we knew that this was really important for our stakeholders. Also, we had a really hard time. We knew we had a lot of complaints from the hunter education groups and people who wanted to get to our camps and other education areas. Finding that page, the Inspire a Kid page, all of that area was very much buried in our current website. So you'll see it's really easy to get to all of these services right here. We're also going to have an education request form. So anybody in the state, whether it's an organization, a school, anything like that, if it's a business, if they want us to come and do any kind of education, skills training, anything like that, they'll be able to submit a request form and we will be able to track it, collect it, and be able to provide greater services to the state. Here's some more pages just to kind of give you a look and feel. So these colors, the font, everything on here is per the agency's new brand standards. And so brand standards are essentially, we know what Game and Fish looks like in terms of the uniform and the green trucks, but this is what we look like digitally. And so it's a consistency in our fonts and our colors and our logos and our designs and how our layouts look. Under license and applications, this page has been simplified. You'll be able to see everything at first glance without having to scroll, but you can still scroll on this page. So this is the top of this page. Apply for a license, buy a license, watercraft decals, everything that anybody wants with highlighted dates is all available here. And then as you go further down, here's your application dates and deadlines. So essentially we're scrolling through the page down like this. It's hard to see, of course, on our PowerPoint, but we're really excited about this. And this will be the bottom of the page. The footer of our page remains the same, as does our header, and you will always be able to access them and stay there. So you can always get back, see this other information, etc. So just to give you a little idea, here's your before and after. Here's our current web page on your left. You can see that brand standards is kind of all over with colors, themes, fonts, sizes, everything. After, we're looking for a very much clean, simplified, kind of ease of access and use right here. This is something new. We are going to have a species profile page. We do not have this on our current website. The goal of this is to highlight the species that the department manages, our department research projects, all of our interactions, and then also give some educational information. It's really hard to see, and I'm quite sad about that, but this page focuses on mule deer, and you'll be able to scroll down and it'll talk about all kinds of information about it, from habitat to identification, tracks, disease, anything like that, and what the department's doing for management, research, all of that stuff. So here's the bottom of the page. There'll also be an opportunity for sounds. If you want to hear what a mule deer sounds like, we'll be able to embed video content. So it's kind of a really one-stop shop to integrate and highlight our species. We know that the department has over 800 species, so this will be a great work in progress. However, it doesn't require additional wireframes. We're going to be able to build this out as we go. And so we're really excited about that. All of our pages will be able to manage all of the content, all of the pictures, video, anything like that. So all of this can change for seasonal use and different things like that as well. And they put fun facts in here too, which I thought is a great thing. So here's some more information, other species you can click on. And so it just kind of gives you that opportunity, look at migration patterns, be able to really highlight across the department the work that's being done for the state. Hunt Planner. We know that Hunt Planner is one of the most important tools on our website, and honestly, it's taken the most work. I'm not quite so sure that our vendor was aware of how much work what is in our Hunt Planner and how much programming and coding is required to be able to get all this information synchronized. And so, but we made this a major priority, and it's taken a lot of time, but we're really pleased with how it's looking. And we think it's going to have just the same, if not better, functional skills with the opportunity to build out even more. So you can't really see this, but you would be on the left side. This is the top of the page. And then as you scroll down, we're getting towards the bottom of the page. So just kind of giving you an overall look of if you're in Hunt Planner and say you're going to be hunting, pronghorns, here's where you'd go, and it'll tell you about your areas, all the information you need to make your hunt successful, etc. We're also going to make sure that we update all of the regional pages. We think it's really important that all the regions are able to highlight their uniqueness. They're all very important. And so here's an example of the regional pages. And then on the left is the top of it. And then the right is as you scroll down. And again, we're really excited. We've had a lot of conversations with our information and education specialists, our INEs, just like Regina, about being able to, we're working on cleaning up our photo database and doing some different things so that we have seasonal capacity to change our pictures based on time of year, make it really relevant for our users and our audience, a true reflection of what we do. Here's some more Here's the walk-in hunting areas, just kind of highlighting these pages that are done. So this page is quite difficult to see and to read, and I'm sorry about that, but there are millions of little pages on here, not millions, hundreds actually. These are all of the wireframes that had to be built for the new website. So just to give you an idea, the vendor gave us a number of different templates that we could pick and choose from, and then plug in our wireframes. And so those have all been done. They've all been vetted by both the website committee and IT and my shop. And so we're working right now. The vendor is in the process of, we're past the design phase where it's pretty much wrapping up, other than like little hiccups here and there. And the vendor Open has started migrating our content. So the next steps will be really going in there and making sure that everything's up to date, current, and whatnot. Any questions?
Fantastic. How many clicks are we looking at?
In total?
Yeah, how many, what is it gonna be?
I'm not sure, you know, the industry, we're not quite 100% through there, but the industry standard, if you want to keep somebody engaged, is 6 clicks or less to get somewhere. So within our webpage, we definitely think we can do that. Now within our licensing program, we're not quite there yet. And so that'll be another layer to work on down the road. So.
Excellent. It's gonna be really nice. I mean, it's, everybody's really gonna like it, and we sure appreciate it. And I know you guys have been working overtime on it, and we sure appreciate it, because it's gonna be excellent for, so one of the biggest complaints you hear is our website now, and I think it's gonna clear it all up. So great job.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Fantastic.
To number 20.
Commissioner Lunball would like a 10-minute or.
After a 15-minute break, we'll do number 20.
Good job.
Sorry.
On
It's like, sorry. We're back in online. Okay, is Commissioner Byrd online with us also? Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Bruce. Thank you.
Great, Mr. President Roberts, Director Nesbitt, commissioners. Today I was going to give you just an overview of our work with the legislative interim session and our work with the individual committees. I would say that this year our work was fairly active. The committee work starts in May and we're not quite wrapped up. We have a few more committees in December. So we'll wrap up that just in time for this session to begin. But this year we testified in seven different committees and 12 different times, to give you perspective. We provided a lot of informational items throughout the summer, everywhere from the work that the department is doing on elk management with you guys, aquatic invasive species updates, especially concerning our neighboring states, CWD, feral horses and impacts to wildlife, our role in law enforcement on Office of State Lands and Investment Properties, wildlife crossings, and sage grouse updates, just to name a few of those informational items. And then we also testified and are looking at approximately 9 bills coming out of the interim session that have some impact to the department. Those 9 bills are committee bills that then go to the session. As you guys are probably aware, when a bill comes out of committee, it's been vented quite a bit more than one just introduced during the session. And it usually stands a little bit stronger chance of making it through the session as well. So our main committee that we always testify every year is Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, also known as TRW. The director provided lots of testimony as well as others and gave lots of general updates to the committee as well. 2 bills moved out of that committee and that will go to session. Both of these bills came out of the Wildlife Task Force, and I believe the director has talked to you in his updates previously, but I'll go over them briefly for you. The first bill that's moving on to session is preference points and weighted bonus points taking preference points and turning them into weighted bonus points for bighorn sheep and moose. And then the second one that recently went through TRW is a non-resident fee increase for the special draw for elk, deer, and antelope. Other bills I want to draw your attention to, there's a few that came out of the Joint Transportation Committee. And one of those increases death benefits for law enforcement that were killed in the line of duty. And this will also include our game wardens in that bill. There's also a bill out of that committee which allows the department to rehire retired game wardens as an option if we so choose to. And then Joint Judiciary Committee, Chief King provided a lot of testimony on the issue of trespassing. Now, this committee is not taking up or has chosen not to take up corner crossing, but they have worked on a number of bills to help clarify some issues. Some of those related to the definition of aircraft, especially related to drones. This bill is really in line with the commission's definition, which is good to see. And then another bill there really addresses the ability for our game wardens to help enforce trespassing when a hunter has passed through a private property to hunt on another property and then returning and passing through that property again. Other bills that are still yet to come, there's one in select water that is currently being drafted that the department may have a role in. And this one deals with possibly the state having a state permit on private ponds that are developed for recreation. If that goes through, the permitting agency will most likely be Department of Environmental Quality, but the department will most likely have a review in that permitting process so that we can provide recommendations and impacts to the fish and wildlife. That one's yet to be seen, and that should be in December. We'll know more on that one. So the session this year, you guys probably know, is a regular session. So it starts the second week in January, January 10th, and will go to the end of February. And I do want to thank the three commissioners that we lean on, especially when we're doing our fiscal analysis of draft bills. Commissioner Ladwig, Lundwell, and Brokaw, that really help assist myself, our fiscal division, and our whole team in reviewing these bills up front. So with that, I'll just stand for any questions.
Do you know why they're not going to address the corner crossings? Any idea?
Director Nesbitt, do you have any perspective on that?
I think there's a lot of folks that would like to see how the federal case turns out before they dive into that. And I think that's probably well advised if they do that. Wait and see how that court case comes out. And there's been some interest from some legislators in dealing with it now, but and it still could come during the session, but we certainly didn't see anything during the interim. There was, though, a lot of focus on this issue that Angie brought up. Chief King's been working hard on that, trying to find some paths forward to deal with what used to be commonly interpreted as normal is no longer. And so there's been some problems in a few jurisdictions around the state with that, and we'll continue to work on that through the session.
Could you elaborate a little
President?
bit more on the preference points and the bonus thing? Points.
Yeah, President Roberts, this was a wildlife task force one, and it was given a lot of discussion at the task force for a lot of time. The TRW discussion was also in depth regarding it. So your preference points would be changed into weighted bonus points with the idea of having a drawing with more of a distribution of chances of folks getting in. So just an open random draw versus currently the preference point system allows some sort of knowledge about when you might draw and what age you might be. And the thought is that age of being able to draw one of these tags is creeping up and up and up. And how do we allow folks, younger folks and other folks have an opportunity to draw either a moose or a sheep? And so the idea behind this bill would be to change that method and allow that opportunity to be spread out. And it would go into effect, I believe, 4 years from now. Director, is that what they
Yeah,
chose?
it's a soft transition to allow folks that currently have a high number of preference points to still, if they're real close, to still be in the preference point draw, and then it would transition 4 years after the bill was passed in its current form. Just as an example too, to talk about the weighted portion of this. So if you currently had 10 preference points and this bill was to pass after the 4-year transition period, you would, let's just say you had 10 after the 4-year transition period, you would go into the bonus point drawing with 10 squared. So you'd go in with 100 chances to draw versus the current system where 75% of the licenses go to the highest preference point holders. It's a pretty big shift. It's going to a strictly random draw, but you have more chances the longer you've been in the system, the more points you've accumulated.
Yeah, it's the sports analogy. It's like the NBA draft lottery. The worst teams get the most balls in the hopper, and so they have more of a chance. And it's a switch from certainty over time to more chances. But anyone has a chance in drawing.
The one
The task force spent days and days and days on that, didn't they?
they did and analyzed a lot of data. We were lucky we had some modeling that was done by LCCC that looked out to see if it would, if you let this current system stay in place for 20 or 30 more years, would it still provide predictability that far down the road if we have the same number of licenses we do today with the same number of people going into the system? And eventually it phases out to where it's no longer effective. And it also, I think the average age we learned in that of a sheep hunter today is 57, and it goes up every single year. So you'd get to a point where the only people that would be in would be 70 and 80-year-old people that. So anyway, that's a summary of some of the big, it took a long time to get there, as Pete can attest to, but a lot of discussion in the task force.
Mr. President, I will have to highlight too about sort of the power of the task force that I've noticed with TRW and the conversations happening. They were really respectful of the recommendations that came out of the trust or the task force. And you could just tell that they appreciated all the work that folks had put into and took those recommended bills very seriously.
Is there any way that the department could provide the commission like a bullet points on that? So, because that's going to be the first thing the commissioners, we've heard it, and that's where that'll be the most, if we just get some bullet points or something we talked about.
Mr. President, absolutely. I'll provide those to you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to what comes out of the trespass issue. It's a huge problem in our part of the world, as it is in maybe other parts of the state, but our landowners are having a lot of trouble with it. What to do, what not to do. There's a lot of conflicting statements. Post it, don't post it, call the sheriff's department, call the game and fish. It's very confusing. It's very difficult, and it creates a lot of confrontation. Hopefully they can try to clear some of that up. Question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 21. Alan?
Morning, President Roberts, Commissioners, Director Nesvik. This morning, I'm going to give you an update on what's going on as far as AIS and the recent finding of zebra mussels in Pactola Reservoir. If you remember, Pactola is about 28 miles from the northeast border of Wyoming. Significant jump on that finding from the eastern half of South Dakota to the western half. So as a kind of a refresher, back in July, a spear gun fisherman found zebra mussel on a pair of sunglasses in Pactola. So that prompted us to respond to that. How we responded to that was we prior to that finding, every boat that came from the eastern half of South Dakota entering into Wyoming had to be decontaminated. So we changed our protocols, made every boat that came from South Dakota had to be deconned. And we operated that way until September, when they started to pull boats off of the water that had been moored at the reservoir at marinas. And they found zebra mussels that were attached, live zebra mussels attached. So the infestation was larger than they anticipated. And so that prompted us to step up our game some more. We had been doing testing prior to that finding in our reservoirs. We had come up negative for veligers and all those testings. Our data indicated that the two primary destinations after leaving Pactola into Wyoming, next destined was Keyhole, and then Glendale was number 2. So after finding that the infestation was a little bit larger than we anticipated, and considering that both in Keyhole and Glendale, the fishing in the fall really picks up, we decided we need to alter how we're doing things. We've operated in a perimeter approach with our inspections. We had some inspections at certain waters like Glendale, but Keyhole and Glendale both presented some problems there, and that there's lots of different access routes in those reservoirs. And in order to really protect those reservoirs in the state waters, we decided we needed to change things up a little bit. And what we decided to do was to close down some boat ramps on those waters to more effectively control access into those reservoirs, and so that we can inspect potentially every boat that comes in there. So Wildlife Division, the Fish Division, and State Parks were a huge collaborator with us on this effort, decided that the best approach up at Keyhole was to close all the ramps but Coulter boat ramp, and then at Glendale close all the ramps down except for one at Whiskey Gulch. So State Parks worked with us in putting barriers there at the closed ramps. Starting October 5th, we transitioned to closing ramps there. Now at Glendale was a little bit easier because only 3 ramps were in the water at that time anyway. But still, it was a major deal for the public when we proposed this. They viewed it as, limiting their opportunity. We decided that how we would do this would, we'd have our operation hours from 7 to 7. And in that time of year, that was basically daylight hours. And then after 7 p.m., boats or before 7 p.m., boats would have to come off the water. And then the ramp would be cabled. Starting 7 a.m. the next day, we'd have our inspection stations open, and boats could again access the reservoir. And the reason we had those operating hours was these critters are small. Doesn't make sense to be doing these inspections before daylight under lights, because we're trying to protect our waters. In order to do that, we have to be able to see the critters. So that was October 5th. October 25th, we transitioned again to sunset or sunrise to sunset as the daylight hours waned. And we're currently running it that way right now. I have to give a lot of kudos to our crews, and I know the director mentioned that yesterday. There was a lot of angst with the public on how we were going to do this, and our crews, wildlife and AIS and Fish Division and state parks really stepped up and made this happen with very little problems after we initiated it. So path forward. So right now, that's what we're still operating as the October 24th protocols. And those will be in operation until the ice, those reservoirs are capped with ice. And hopefully in Keyhole, it will be by the end of the month, but we don't know that. And Glendo typically is a little bit later. Sometimes they're fishing right up to Christmas, but with these cold temperatures, who knows what that'll be. But we'll continue these protocols until then. Right now, the crews are currently doing meetings, trying to figure out the path forward for next year. You know, next summer when we have a peak boating season, it's going to be really difficult to close any boat ramps. And you know, every boat ramp during peak times at these reservoirs those parking lots are full. So they've been working really hard internally right now within AIS and Fish Division, trying to figure out how we're going to do that. And then we'll come up, we've got a meeting we're trying to get scheduled with state parks in December to present that to them. And then we'll look at doing some public outreach this winter on what our plans are. Right now, kind of what we're looking at is moving back towards a perimeter approach again, but it's going to take more check stations. We're probably going to have a check station in Lusk and then another one at Newcastle to try to cover that southern route up into LAK, and then catch some of those boats through Lusk that way. More check stations means more personnel and more equipment, which we're moving forward on that. And then extra personnel too, to try to capture some of the shoulder seasons too. You know, typically up until this year, you know, we closed down check stations in mid-October or before. Now we're going to try to catch these shoulder seasons in the fall, and then earlier in beginning perhaps in March, so that we have good coverage. Because basically, right now, boat inspections are our main prevention technique, prevent these critters from coming in the state.
Chief,
Commissioner
are we gonna start funneling boats elsewhere now because of the restrictions? Is Lake DeSmet gonna get more activity because we're restricting on Keyhole? Are you anticipating some of that issue?
So to be clear, these protocols that we're under right now, as far as funneling to certain boat ramps, are just for this fall. So next year or within this winter, we're evaluating an approach on how we're going to do next year, considering that if we were to close down boat ramps at Keyhole or Glendo, that could happen. But you know, that would be a huge impact on the public because, like I said, most of those boat ramps and parking areas during when the walleye fishing is really good or during the water sports season are full. And so we're trying, that's why we're trying to move back to a more of a perimeter approach, so that we'll be catching the boats coming in from Torrington, from Lusk, at Beulah, that typically come to these waters like Keyhole and Glendo. So I don't anticipate, if we take that approach, redistribution of any kind of watercraft to say to Smith, because they shouldn't be limited on accessing Keyhole or Glendo next year like it is this fall.
And you don't think we had any of that this fall?
I can't say for sure, but I would doubt it. The numbers of anglers out there in the fall aren't like they are during the summer, but there is certainly a following that like to fish the fall at Glendo and Keyhole when the fishing's good.
Well, just so you committee knows, what I've asked Alan and his crew to do is to really focus on the threat. And the threat is either boats that are in our state leave and come back, or boats that come into the state from somewhere else. And, you know, I've asked him to try to find ways that we can make it more convenient for people that aren't really the threat, people that live, you know, in your example, that live in Sheridan or going to DeSmet, have an easier time because they're not potentially the source of the problem. It's somebody coming from somewhere else that's not in our state. And so they're going to look at that. We're also, you know, I think we need to do some good messaging. There was a lot of folks that didn't understand that the single boat ramp solution was temporary and not long-term. And a lot of folks didn't understand that. So we got to make sure we message good and adequately so that folks understand what we're trying to do. And then I think the last thing is the protection message is really important. And this is, I understand it's inconvenient for a lot of folks, but we really owe it to the waters of our state for the long term to do everything we can to protect our state from this. And there's some different messaging floating around out there that, hey, we've had zebra mussels in our lake for a long time, and it's the walleye fishing's great. And you know, from our perspective, that's all a very short-term look at this problem. As I've told the fish crew, you know, 80 years ago, there was a time when people said cheatgrass was great. And, you know, where are we at today? And if we had the opportunity to go back and not have cheatgrass in our state, would have we done it? Absolutely. And so I view this as a very similar problem. It's not native. We know that it can create all kinds of issues for fisheries, but also it can create a lot of issues for a lot of other agricultural infrastructure, hydroelectric power, municipal water. I mean, it's really important that folks understand this is a protection effort for the state of Wyoming that's worth taking on.
As the department gave into consideration to adding more full-time employees for AIS, it seems to me with the work going on and trying to find contractual people, is there any room for any more full-time employees? Because I think they're trying to find people now. I mean, Utah can't even find anybody, can they? Is there any way that Wyoming, we're looking at locking in a few at these high entrance places? Maybe, I don't know. I know we're capped, of course, but whatever we do, but it just seems with the workforce out there, kind of, it's got to be tough hiring. And I think with full-time, you know.
Yeah, so President Roberts, answer that question. Little history. The program's been in existence for about 12 years now. We had one permanent employee and then operated with seasonals. A couple years ago, well, in conjunction with our strategic plan development, we identified AIS as a priority, and in order to really build the program, we needed more permanent personnel to develop it. And in retrospect, thankfully, we did that. We brought on 4 more permanent personnel. We placed 1 in Cheyenne, 1 in Green River, 1 in Casper, and 1 in Sheridan. And Sheridan operates Keyhole, and Casper operates Glendale. Without having those permanent personnel there to try to navigate this threat would have been extremely difficult. So thankfully we did that, and so we're in a lot better place because of it.
It's this has got to be a tough job market out there with
It is.
we are, you know, I was wondering, is there any federal grants or anything that we could tap into to?
We do.
I'm sure you, yeah. Anything? No more other questions?
Is there any, excuse me, is there any thought to backing off on some like walleye tournaments and things like that? Because there's a lot of interstate transportation of boats and things like that. And I know Glendale, I've been there when the water's low and there's only one dock open. Sometimes it's a 2 or 3 hour wait to get a boat in and out of the water. That's bound to, especially if it's a big tournament like they have down there. Is there any thought to work on that?
Commissioner Ladwick, right now, our thought process on, as far as the tournaments are concerned, have been to make sure that, all those boats that are coming in are being inspected. And part of that protocol is written into their permit, which it is right now. They have to be inspected. And in order to participate in that tournament, and we're continually evaluating what we can do more to make sure we're protected, because you're exactly right. These tournaments draw people from a lot of different states, and those boats fish a lot of different waters. And so we do view those as a threat.
Thank you.
Mr. President. Where, do we still have that a program, or are we developing a program for like certified boats or certified people who are like within the state? We're doing that program, so where they can bypass, so to speak, or?
So we do have a program where we certify people outside of the department that can do inspections.
Well, I meant boats themselves. Say a person who lives in Wheatland or whatever, where to increase the ability to get boats on the water. If they're from Wheatland, they never leave, those types of things, that they're able to bypass, so to speak. I forget the terminology that was used.
Local boater program.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
To help alleviate having to check every single boat that comes through there. If it's a boat that never leaves the water or never leaves the area, that's not the one that's a threat to us.
Yeah, Commissioner Doobie, that's a great point, and that is something that we've talked at length with, and we're trying to wrap our heads around where we can insert that. Our initial discussions were in relation to if we had to initiate a rapid response plan, but this situation has also made us try to evaluate how we can have less impact on our resident boaters, which aren't necessarily the biggest threat right now, but yeah, protect the waters and so yes, we are talking about that right now.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. And since I'm already standing here, next agenda item is Flaming Gorge. So I'll take the opportunity to introduce John Walrath. He's one of our 2 fisheries biologists in the Green River region. John has been in that position for about 8 years. Of the many responsibilities that John has in the region, one big one is Flaming Gorge Reservoir management. And so he's going to give you a presentation of what's going on there. Flaming Gorge is truly one of our gems in the state as far as fishery is concerned. And with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Mr. President, members of the commission, Director Nesvik, good morning. Today I'm here to tell you a bit of a story about managing lake trout on Flaming Gorge Reservoir, specifically those that are less than 28 inches. You'll hear me talk a little bit about those greater than 28 inches, our trophy fish, but today I really want to focus on those that we're concerned about in the reservoir. And I'll start off by going over a little bit of a background on the reservoir, and then go over some of the data that we do have on the fisheries there. And then from that data, what kind of rose as red flags to us as managers, and why we ultimately propose the current regulation that we have in place, which is 12 fish per day, 24 in possession for those less than 28 inches. And then people still have the right to have 1 fish over 28. A little bit on the background on the gorge itself. It is certainly a popular destination fishery, and we'll show some data on this a little bit later. But basically right now, kokanee is the main reason why a lot of people come to the gorge and recreate, spending a lot of time and money in the area supporting our businesses when they come to the gorge. The reservoir itself is quite long at 90 miles, which causes some challenges for us as managers. One of which is that it's co-managed by the department and then our partners to the south, Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. Because it's so long, we do see a lot of latitudinal changes throughout the reservoir, one of which is productivity. A lot of our nutrients come in from the north end of the reservoir, that inflow area, and by the time that water goes all the way down into Utah, those nutrients have played out and that productivity decreases. And then that decrease in productivity changes in habitat, that also changes our fish populations and densities throughout the reservoir as well. However, we do try to make angling on the reservoir as simple as possible to our constituents. One of the things we do is try to adopt the similar fishing regulations on each side of the border. And we do this based on where it makes biological sense and then where it's socially acceptable to our public. So again, kokanee, they are the dominant species targeted by anglers right now in the reservoir. They were first stocked in 1963, and basically this initial stocking initiated the natural reproducing population in the reservoir. That population did crash in the 80s, and as a response to that initial crash, a supplemental stocking program was initiated in 1991, and we have been stocking kokanee intermittently since 1991 as part of that program, to where now we actually have a stocking objective of 1.65 million kokanee. And those 1.65 million fish are stocked into the gorge through 3 different entities: the department, Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, and the Jones Hole National Fish Hatchery. And we've basically been meeting this objective or exceeding it since 2014. And it's also important to point out that kokanee are in the reservoir and serving 2 purposes, one of which is to feed lake trout, as kokanee are the primary food base for our trophy lake trout fishery, and also to support our anglers, give anglers opportunity to go out there and catch kokanee. Lake trout, they're a long-lived species. So in essence, for our maintaining our trophy lake trout fishery, we don't need a whole lot of lake trout to actually make it into that greater than 28-inch length, because they're going to live for a long time, because we don't allow a lot of harvest on those individuals, and they are long-lived. They are a popular recreational and commercial fishery, and because of their popularity, they are a focus of a lot of research, not just here, but in the US in general, typically focused on their predation impacts on other native and sport fisheries, and then also on ways to maintain other trophy fisheries. Lake trout within the gorge were established via drift from the Finger Lakes once the reservoir was filling. And there were 2 individual stocking events of lake trout just to help boost their numbers in the reservoir. And since they are a naturally reproducing population, no other stocking events have occurred since 1983. They are a popular sport fishery, especially into the 80s. It's also important, I think, to point out that we had trophy-sized lake trout in the 70s, just from that natural drift coming down into the reservoir. And basically, those individuals were sustaining themselves on the highly abundant Utah chub that were in the reservoir. And basically, by the 1980s, we had a shift in the prey densities out there, where a lot of the habitat used by the Utah chub just started to deteriorate because the reservoir itself was aging. A lot of the sagebrush was deteriorating, utilized by the Utah chub. So when the Utah chub declined, kokanee became the prey source lake trout sought to sustain themselves on, which then caused the kokanee crash in the 80s, which then implemented our kokanee stocking program. Because lake trout are popular, they are, like I said, they're the focus of a lot of different research projects. And these projects are just some of the main water bodies in the west here: Pend Oreille, Priest Lake, Flathead Lake, Blue Mesa. Perhaps the most popular is the Western lake trout woes, which is basically a quick synopsis over a lot of different case studies from around the West, some of the take-home messages, things they observed from their lake trout populations, what they did in order to combat their lake trout issues that they were having. So I would encourage everyone, if they have not read that article, to Google that and read it in their free time, as it's quite alarming and also enlightening at the same time. But basically from that article, there's a few things we can take away that were warning signs for us as managers to be on the lookout for with our own lake trout populations. When we have a high abundance of lake trout, what they typically saw was a smaller length at maturity, poorer condition of those fish, a low annual mortality where more individuals were surviving each year, creating a larger population size. And then they also saw a decrease in growth of those individuals. And because they had a higher abundance, then they also saw a decrease in the amount of food that was out in those water bodies. As kind of one example of a case study, just to the south here, is a fairly comparable reservoir to Flaming Gorge. That would be Blue Mesa. It's roughly about a fifth of the size of the gorge, but it does have a popular trophy lake trout fishery in combination with a kokanee fishery. But essentially, what did Blue Mesa see? In the early 2000s, they saw a 90% reduction in their kokanee population. And they also saw a reduced condition of the lake trout there. And what they learned after doing some additional research in the reservoir is that most of the kokanee were being consumed by lake trout less than 24 inches. So it wasn't their trophy component crashing their kokanee fishery, but those that were of a much smaller size. And that predation on kokanee got so bad is that they had to stop spawning kokanee on that reservoir. And as a response to their crash in the kokanee population, they made some pretty drastic changes to their management. One of which was they went to an unlimited harvest on those less than 32 inches. In Colorado here, they're treating anything greater than 32 inches as a trophy fish. So only have one fish over 32. But they also implemented mechanical removal using nets on the reservoir, which is rather expensive. And they also initiated an incentivized harvest program where they paid anglers for the lake trout that they did catch and collected the heads from those individuals as a way to pay them for harvesting those fish. Currently, in the reservoir, they're stocking 3 million kokanee, which if we expand that to the size of the gorge per acre, that's about 10 times higher than what we're currently stocking. And our facilities can't grow 10 times or raise 10 million kokanee for the gorge. So we can't stock our way out of our situation on the gorge as Blue Mesa. And then as a response to all the efforts that they've put in place here, they actually have kokanee returning to anglers again, and they have started collecting eggs from kokanee there as well again. So a bit of a success story, but it did take a lot of effort for them to bring it back online. So getting into some of the data from Flaming Gorge, I need to say, you're going to hear me talk about small lake trout, trophy lake trout. I'll reiterate again that basically a trophy lake trout for us is anything greater than 28 inches, and small lake trout is anything less than 28. We as managers have a few other names for different size groups of those fish, but for the purpose of this talk, we'll stick with just small and trophy. So creoles on the gorge occur about every 10 years. So next year does mark our 10-year anniversary of this, and we'll be conducting another creole. But looking back to what was done in 2013, we wanted to highlight the fact that rainbow trout were the dominant species targeted by anglers in the early 2000s. And then we had kokanee salmon making up about another quarter of our anglers out there, and lake trout were another 25%. And this was a year-long creel. And we'll show a little bit later how basically the lake trout angling community is more heavily dominated in the wintertime than it is in the summertime. But the lake trout category here is combined with both small and trophy anglers. Jumping forward 10 years to 2013, just looking at the summertime data, what we see has happened is that now kokanee are the dominant species targeted by the anglers, and rainbow trout have taken the second seat at nearly 20%. But also we saw a decline in the amount of time anglers spent targeting the small lake trout at about 8% and the trophy lake trout at less than 6%. So our lake trout anglers are making a very small proportion of our anglers out there in the reservoir. Most of these anglers are targeting kokanee. The clicker seems to be not working. Thank you. So this one is just looking at the winter of 2013. And this is where we definitely notice this is where we get the majority of our harvest on lake trout. It's also worth pointing out that in our poor ice years like we've had the last 3 years, it also means we're not getting a lot of harvest on our lake trout because we don't have the anglers out there on the ice. They're staying home instead of going out onto the lake, expanding over a wide range of area to target these lake trout. In poor ice years, we just get fewer people going out onto the ice. Where are people coming from? Basically in 2013, in the summertime, a lot of our anglers are non-residents, 55% of which are coming from Utah, and then 30% are coming from Wyoming, with the remainder coming from other states. Looking at the winter, we see that when road conditions are a little bit worse, harder for people to travel, Wyoming anglers are the dominant ones out there, out on the ice. And that's followed by another 30% coming from Utah. So a first look at some of the figures that we have here of the actual netting data from the gorge. We have years on the x-axis and then catch per unit effort on the y-axis, just fish per hour. The top circle data set there, that's from our trophy lake trout. And then the triangles on the bottom represent our small lake trout. And the only thing I would like to point out on this is just the overall decline in the numbers of trophy lake trout and the slow increase in the densities of the small lake trout. And this should also point out that over the years, the lake trout regulations have never declined. We've always been increasing regulations on lake trout over the last few decades. So despite these increases in fishing regulations, we have not seen a decline in the densities of our small lake trout. We still keep this slow, steady increase. The next figure here is showing lake trout length at age. These are two different data sets where we have age on the x-axis and total length on the y-axis. The dark circles here are from Dan Yule's graduate work completed in 1992. And basically, if we look at an 8-year-old fish, Yule's work was showing that that individual was on average about 31 inches long. Step forward to 2016, when the department collected our own age structures and analyzed the data, that same 8-year-old fish was now about 21 inches. So we have seen a pretty drastic shift in the growth of lake trout to where they're now growing much slower than they were in the early 90s. The last few years, we've also been conducting a lot of extensive netting on the reservoir. The purpose of this netting was to help us try to figure out how we can effectively capture lake trout less than 16 inches. Sort of a early warning system, so to speak, give us a heads up when we have large year classes of lake trout likely coming up into the system. And while we learned what sizes of mesh were good for targeting these individuals, from these figures here, we can also see, we learned that we have a steep decline in the presence of lake trout greater than 22 inches. So it seems like we have a bottleneck at 22 where there's just a lot of individuals in the population that have no ability to grow larger than 22 inches. This figure here is actually compiled by our partners, UDWR. They go out and perform our hydroacoustics estimates for kokanee in the reservoir each year. So we have years on the x-axis here, and then the solid red line represents the total number of kokanee that were stocked into the reservoir by the 3 entities that conduct our stocking. And then the bars on here are basically showing the estimated number of kokanee recruitment in the reservoir by 3 different size classes. But basically all of these bars are showing kokanee less than 12 inches in length. And what we see that's a little bit concerning on this graph is that despite relatively high stocking numbers the last few years, we have seen a 4 years in a row decline in the abundance of kokanee in the reservoir. And this is the same figure, or I guess a different figure, same data, just a different way of looking at the data, where instead of we have different size groups of kokanee, this is just broken out by regions. If you remember, we have 3, the inflow on the top end of the reservoir, the open hills in the middle, and then the canyon, which is down in Utah. We can see that a big reason that we have a decline in our kokanee estimates is really driving or being driven from our estimates in the open hills section of the reservoir, where we had a high of about 680,000 kokanee in 2017 to an estimate of 80,000 in 2021. And that is a 90% decline in the open hills region over the last 4 years. So some of the things that I think are some of the big takeaway messages here is that anglers are targeting kokanee and rainbows in the summertime, and primarily we get most of our harvest on lake trout in the winter. A lot of our anglers are non-residents, and we have an increasing abundance of the small lake trout and a decreasing number of the trophy lake trout. We've documented that the growth of lake trout has decreased over the years, and that we do have a decreasing abundance of kokanee in the reservoir based on the hydroacoustics data the last 4 years. So some of these things were concerning to us as managers, and we wanted to think proactively about what it is that we could do to try to prevent the need for taking drastic measures in the reservoir, to try to save the kokanee fishery, which is the driving force of the whole reservoir right now. So we wanted to allow anglers the opportunity to harvest small lake trout when the fishing is good. As many anglers on the gorge will tell you, there's good days and there's bad days for lake trout. And there's more bad days than there are good days. But we wanted to make sure that there are those good days that those anglers have the opportunity to go home with more fish because they go out the next day, they're probably not going to catch nearly as many. We wanted to inform anglers on how to target specific congregations of lake trout. That's basically this time of year from the shore where the majority of those fish are 16 to 22 inches long and they're actively spawning on the shallows or in the shallows. And most of our trophy fish are spawning in other areas of the reservoir, not in the shallows with those individuals. We did a lot of educational outreach, trying to inform the public about lake trout and kokanee interactions in general, talking about the Western lake trout woes article and different case studies from around the West of what others have observed already happening and what they had to do to save their fish populations. And then we did quite a bit of public outreach on the regulation that we currently have. Once it was even enacted back in 2019, we're still conducting that outreach, informing the public on why that was enacted. And then we're supportive of lake trout fishing derbies that are in alignment with our management objectives. So while we have this regulation in place, we're still conducting research. We're figuring out right now what lake trout are eating in the reservoir. That work should be made available to us this winter. And as I said previously, this next year we'll be conducting a creel survey. And while we're doing the creel survey, we're also going to be trying to generate a population estimate for these lake trout less than 28 inches. And once we have these pieces of information, we'll be able to combine them into a bioenergetics model that we will use then to estimate just how large of an impact these lake trout are having on our other sport fisheries in the reservoir. And coupling that with some yield modeling, we'll be able to look at different regulations that we can invoke and what levels of harvest we need so that we can keep our lake trout population in check with the prey densities that are out there and also still maintain our trophy lake trout fishery. And then this is just a photo collage kind of showing a little bit of the reality of some of the lake trout that we do catch. The one thing I want to point out here is that these lake trout aren't solely consuming fish throughout the year. I mean, they're opportunistically consuming these kokanee and rainbows out there. The thing that's a little bit alarming is that it's not these lake trout that are 25, 26 inches long. Some of these fish in this picture are down to 14 inches in size, and they're already consuming some kokanee that are 6 inches long. So if we have a high abundance of these individuals, we could see a pretty drastic impact to our sport fisheries, which is why we want to encourage our public to go out and take advantage of the liberal fish regulations that we have in place to take advantage of the high abundance of lake trout that we do have and hopefully stave off any crash to our kokanee population. And with that, I would just like to invite commissioners out this next spring. We typically conduct our annual spring netting on the gorge in early May. And if anyone's interested, I'd be more than happy to bring you out on the boat for a day or 2 days, however long you'd like, and help us collect some of this data and spend some time on the gorge. And I'll take any questions you guys might have.
Questions from the
What, if any, effect is the drawdown on the gorge having on species?
Mr. President, Commissioner Doobie, I try to think of it as, you know, you guys have cups at the tables. You know, if we put 10 fish in that cup and it's full, and then you drink a few sips of water out of your cup, those fish are still in your cup. They're just occupying less space, or there's less habitat for them. So what we can expect to see is just more interaction between lake trout and kokanee, more interaction for the lake trout and the rainbow trout as the reservoir comes down, we're going to have less shoreline habitat because a lot of our bays are going to end up going dry, which just means we're going to have more interaction and more predation from lake trout, some other sport fish that do seek those shallower, warmer waters to escape that predation.
So you could see an increase in harvest or feeding on the kokanee.
We could see an increase in, I suppose time will tell, as we have no data to really show what's historically been observed in the gorge right now, as currently we're at the lowest levels we've been at since it was filled. The most similar time frame was in 2001 when the reservoir was basically at this level. And 3 years later, after 2001, was our lowest kokanee estimate ever documented in the gorge. But we also weren't stocking 1.65 million kokanee at that time.
John, are there, if we continue to see this trend, are there ways, if we were to explore agency take, to target the pups to try to harvest pups on our own? Kind of like, I guess, similar to what they've done at Yellowstone Lake.
I missed the first part of your question.
Are there ways if we decided agency take was going to be necessary to address this problem because it continues to trend the wrong ways, are there ways for us to target those pup lake trout to remove them ourselves?
There are ways in which we can do it. It has been done in other water bodies that are even larger than the gorge, such as you mentioned, Yellowstone Lake, Lake Pend Oreille up in Idaho. Those were basically completed by commercial commercial licenses, where they had large commercial crews coming in, setting large nets in those water bodies, and then also setting gill nets that were about a foot high. But those gill nets were normally, if I remember right, about a mile long, and they would serpentine them throughout the reservoir. Those operations were incredibly expensive and very labor intensive. And I would hope we don't have to go down that road, as yes, it would be something very new for the department to have to look into and very expensive to conduct, but it can be done.
Well, let me say that Flaming Gorge is world class. I mean, it's a bucket list for people all around the world in the United States. I want to commend you guys for what a great, fantastic job you do managing that resource, because let there be no doubt, in the fishery world, this thing is right at the top of the food chain. So I appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good morning, Mr. President, Director Nesvik, Commissioners. Thank you for having us here today. My name is Jill Randall. I'm the Big Game Migration Coordinator for the department. And Nick Scribner, the Fish Passage Coordinator, is going to be presenting with me. And we're going to be talking about migration, not just big game migration, but all migration, fish migration in particular. We are working really hard to try to elevate kind of both groups up to the same level that big game has experienced for the last several years, as far as momentum and public interest and all of that. So just going to talk to you today really about some great things the department's doing. First thing I want to mention, we've got a new team in place. The director's office formulated an interdivisional team to talk about migration issues and wildlife crossings. And this is kind of a bit of a new approach for the department. We have a lot of working groups that we do, but they tend to be focused in one division. And this is very intentional that it is across all divisions. We have representation from everybody on this team. And we're really trying to work hard to continue to be a leader in the nation Wyoming has certainly presented ourselves both with the advancement of science and implementing conservation on the ground. And one of the directives and charges of this team is to continue to lead the way. And we also have a lot of other opportunities that are in our hands right now with potential federal funding that's coming in. I know Director Nesvik mentioned some of that to you yesterday. And hopefully this team can help put the department in a better position to be able to prioritize and manage bringing some of those funds into Wyoming. We are also working on an operational plan right now that's going to kind of prioritize some of our top recommendations and priorities to the director's office to look at things that we can be doing to move forward with both advancing the science and implementing conservation on the ground. A big part of this team has really been ramping up the communication efforts, both from an internal kind of communication within the department, making sure all of our employees are informed and aware of what's going on, but certainly communicating with our publics and continuing to message that component of both the aquatic migration and the big game migration messages together. We've got a lot of social media and website components. With the new website, we're going to be kind of refreshing some of the migration work that we have there. So I'm excited to see where that brings us moving forward. Certainly, you've been living in a hole if you haven't heard about big game migration in the last couple of years. And I just want to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same footing with what we're talking about here. But the component of connecting winter and summer ranges, I think it's what everybody talks about. Everybody knows that our big game animals have to move in many of our herds to get between these ranges that are in different parts of the landscape. The part that doesn't get as much attention, in my opinion, as it should, is the nutritional component of migrating. So we have data that shows some of our animals are spending 2 to 3 months in that migratory habitat. So as they're moving between, they're actually using that area as a seasonal range, a very important seasonal range. And they're able to maximize the highest quality vegetation as they're moving across the landscape. So that concept of surfing the green wave that's gotten all the notoriety is really focused on maximizing the amount of nutrition that these animals can get as they go between winter range and summer range. They're able to kind of ride that peak nutritional component as it moves up in elevation as we get that green up throughout the spring. Within our herds that might be considered migratory herds, we still have a variety of different strategies that individuals will be putting in place. And some of those animals in our migratory herds are resident. Some of them are migratory, and then this word nomadic kind of gets thrown in, particularly in reference to some of our pronghorn, maybe elk a little bit, but those individuals kind of have demonstrated to us that even if you have a migratory herd, there's a lot of different strategies that individuals will be employing to have a successful life within those herds. Just like a lot of different strategies, even those migratory individuals have a lot of different types of migration that occur. The sublet mule deer herd or the red desert to hoback that gets all the notoriety, that herd has some individuals that only migrate a few miles every spring and fall, whereas others, migrate over 150 miles all the way up into the Tetons and all of that. So we've got to remember as managers that all of those strategies are really important and critical to the success of the herd as a whole. One of the other words that you've probably heard, this word fidelity, maybe in reference to mule deer. This just means that they have a lot of they repeat their use of the same area, the same ground, the same path year after year. The component that does change is the timing of when they use that same path, that migration route for those individuals. We know Wyoming has wildly different climatic conditions year to year. Late springs, later and later falls as we've been experiencing. These deer with our GPS collar data have told us they tend to use still the same routes, but they're changing their timing up quite a bit year to year based on the conditions on the ground. A couple of the other components of big game migration, we do have our migration corridors. We have them kind of broke out into different use levels. High, medium, and low use levels are, they're specified with our GPS collar data. And as you might assume, the highest use areas are those that have the most individuals that are using that component of the corridor. And then down to the low use areas, those are those areas that are still important migratory habitat, but they don't have as many of our collared individuals using that piece of ground. Within the corridor, we also have a couple other components. Stopovers are really important. These are the areas as the animals are moving, particularly, you know, up in the spring and fall. These are the places they're spending the most time along the migration routes. So although the connectivity is important throughout the entire area, foraging, resting, those things are happening in the stopover areas. And these are some of the areas we're focusing a lot of our work on managing vegetation and habitat because of their relative importance within the corridor. The other term that we use is bottlenecks, and the bottleneck areas are those areas that are most critical, like the highest threat areas. They tend to be pinch points or areas where we're concerned about the risk of losing that connectivity component of the corridor. Those are the areas that we emphasize for some of the land use planning that we have there to make sure that we can maintain that connectivity in those areas. I'm going to turn it over to Nick to talk a little bit more in depth about fish passage.
All right, thanks, Jill. And like Jill said, one of the ideas of the team is to elevate some of the messaging and kind of publicity about fish passage and the work that we're doing in the state. But and I'm excited to share some of that information with you guys today. But really, we've been at this for the last 12, 13 years since the inception of the fish passage program in 2009 with the department. We've done quite a bit of work, but I think that's hard for people to grasp with fish versus wildlife. It's hard to see. Hard to see them move. You're not slamming on your brakes going down the highway to avoid a trout or a catfish like you are a deer or elk. So it's hard for people to envision them moving and when they do it and how far they can do it. But this catfish, I think, is a good example of what our inland fisheries can move if they have the opportunity to do so. So it looks like our map got a little distorted here, but anyways, this is a catfish that we tagged back in June of 2007 below Kendrick Dam east of Sheridan, and 4 years later, this fish was caught by a fisherman below Billings, Montana, and Yellowstone River. So, yeah, over 4 years. I mean, that yellow line only represents 415 miles, but that fish undoubtedly moved many, many more miles than that 415 during that time frame. In this project, the Kendrick Dam, oops, the back one. So this fish was tagged right below Kendrick Dam. This is on Clear Creek, just above the confluence of the Powder River. This is one of our very first large passage projects that the department led. So basically, you can see what the fish would come up and hit there is that dam. And what we built here was a 800-foot bypass channel that routes around that dam. So and we have an agreement with the water user that when the river meets certain flow conditions, there's a head gate that opens, and you can see that picture in the bottom right corner. That's what the fish are going up to get around that dam. And how often that thing is open, depends on the water year. But in our monitoring since 2010, 18 of the 19 species that we'd expect to be in Clear Creek have been confirmed using this bypass channel. And it reconnected about 36 miles of habitat that had been blocked off since 1911. So fish passage, what we're talking about is basically connectivity, the ability to fish move freely from one habitat to another, just like wildlife are trying to go from winter range to summer range. the kind of the two areas we focus on are upstream movements, so up and around dams, irrigation diversions, culverts, and downstream movements. Mainly, we're talking here, how do you avoid going down irrigation canals? And since we don't have a lot of hydropower that we have to worry about fish going over compared to some other parts of the country. So why is passage important? Much like it is for wildlife, they have different life history needs at different times of the year. Winter habitat, you know, a lot of fish are moving down into the bigger river systems where they have deep pools and not impacted by ice as much. Spawning habitat, these same fish a lot of times move out of those big river systems and up into the smaller tributaries for spawning. And then you got things like thermal refuge and food resources. And kind of the point I want to make here is there's an irrigation diversion. That's what we're going to call a push-up dam. You know, depending on where you're at in the river system, there's a lot of water getting withdrawn. So that's going to impact your available foods, depending on what side of the diversion dam you're on. So I'm just going to walk through a little bit more, some movement data. This is a Yellowstone cutthroat trout that we just got done doing surgery on, putting in a radio tag. We've been able to partner with Trout Unlimited on some of their adopted trout program where they get schools involved and teach them about fish habitat, fish migration, and things like that. So we've been able to pick up some information on fish movement and ways we can improve their habitat. So this was work we did back in 2009. We tagged some fish up on the Spence Moriarty WMA. And we got 3 or 4 different locations here. Our dots and months are a little bit further apart, but basically that uppermost dot, that's where we tagged the fish in April. And then we tracked it for the next 3 or 4 months. And over that time frame, it moved about 25 miles and ended up getting a little bit closer to Du Bois. Moving down closer to this neck of the woods, we're in the Henry's Fork on the west side of Flaming Gorge. I guess the main point of this, you're going to see a lot of blue dots there and a lot of numbers. So this is a cutthroat that was tagged in the fall of 2020. And basically it spends all its time where you see all those dots and yellow numbers there in a fairly small area. But during the migration season in May, it's found 35 miles or 36 miles upstream from where it was hanging out all winter. And then 2 months later, it's back down in that same general area. So this fish moved about 70 miles in that short time frame. Here's some work we just did this past year. I got a picture coming up that shows this better, but we put a technical ladder on this big diversion on the Wood River west of Matiti. And we tagged a bunch of fish to evaluate, the fish use of this ladder. That picture in the bottom right, gives you an idea of the size of the tag, a pit tag that we're putting in the fish. And when they swim through these antennas that we have at the entrance and the exit of the fish ladder, it'll record the unique identification of that tag. So we get an idea of how long it takes the fish to go through and what size went through. So we tagged about 510 fish. Most of those were Yellowstone cuts. The Wood River is part of our Graybull River drainage, one of the strongholds of Yellowstone cuts in the state. 28% of those tagged fish used the ladder. They range in size from 6 inches to 20 inches. We had both mountain whitefish and Yellowstone cuts use it. And this project reopened about 48 miles that had been blocked since 1972 when this diversion was put in. Kind of the main focus on how we look at downstream movements is looking at entrainment. So when I'm talking about entrainment, basically we're talking about fish that go down an irrigation canal, and basically for the majority of fish that go down that, they're not coming back out. They're stuck. They're going to be fertilizer on your field. They get trapped because of drop structures and other infrastructure that's in an irrigation canal. But this is where our technicians really come and be valuable help here. This is not your glamorous work. It's snow melt water, lots of debris coming down in these nets, and we're sampling fish in here and trying to get an idea of the species and the numbers and the timing that these fish come into the irrigation canals and determine if it's a an issue we need to mitigate or not. Here's just a little bit of data from 4 different ditches we've sampled across the state over the last 15 years. You can get an idea of the species that each dish has, and then the estimated annual fish loss. So we got anywhere from 1,000 fish up to 55,000 fish. So that's what we're estimating on an annual basis. So definitely, there's that's how we use some of this data to determine if we need to put a screen in. 2 of those ditches do have fish screens in them, so we no longer losing fish down those ditches. And we're still working on ways to mitigate a couple of those other canals. So that's just a little bit of background on some of the movement data that we've compiled over the last several years, and we'll hand it back to Jill here and share some stuff on the wildlife side.
So certainly collecting GPS collar data has been a priority for the department for many years. We use our GPS collar studies extensively, not just for migration, but a lot of other management components. We currently have over 30 GPS collar studies that we are conducting on bighorn sheep, mule deer, elk, moose, and pronghorn throughout the state. It's a huge effort, obviously a lot of money. You all have contributed and committed a lot of our funds to these projects because we find them to be extremely valuable, certainly in the world of migration, but other contexts as well. Some of the other components that we're using this collar data for are other seasonal range delineations. Winter ranges continue to be something we're improving upon, delineating and getting those correct on a map with the better data we're gathering from GPS collars. It's really made our ability to fine tune a lot of those management prescriptions in those vital habitats much more feasible. Siting infrastructure and other land use planning is something we use a lot of our collar data for, components such as timing stipulations for different disturbances and activities that will occur out there. You guys have thankfully been very generous with committing funding to wildlife crossings, but we really commit a lot of effort to using our collar data to help prioritize where the most important locations are to put those structures. So this map that you see here, this is Trappers Point near Pinedale, and the dots are the over and underpasses that were put in place. And those locations, when this project was planned and developed, were selected specifically because of known movement data that we had, so that we could put those structures in the locations the animals are already wanting to use, instead of forcing them into a different area, letting data direct where we're putting that conservation on the ground. Also, our collars are being used a lot now to look at places where our roadways are serving as a barrier. So we can see collar data that kind of pulls up right along one of our highways. That's an area that our managers can then look at on the ground, developing solutions to mitigating that barrier effect. We use collar data extensively for vegetation treatments, placement, and prioritization of where our habitat biologists and other biologists across the state are working. This particular area, you can see a black polygon that outlines about a 10,000 acre project, and the collar data from mule deer and elk really show us that those wildlife are focused in the southern part of that project area. Therefore, that's where the department really decided to focus our efforts, both funding and our planning efforts for conducting treatments. Cheatgrass picture you see on the left, we do the same exact strategy with our cheatgrass treatments. Fence modifications, we use a lot of our collar data to, again, prioritize where we're working with fences. We have opportunity beyond what our fiscal and planning means can really implement on the ground. And so, for example, this map, you can see the orange lines on the left. Those are the components of the fence on this one ranch that we indicated as the highest priority to commit our funding and our planning resources toward, because of the overlap with our collar data that we have there. The areas in yellow were identified as a medium priority, and those green areas off on the northeast were the lowest priority. might be still projects that are accomplished, but for our wildlife dollars and our funding, we're trying to focus those in the highest priority areas, and our color data is helping us to accomplish that. Conservation easements, again, we're asked frequently from the land trusts and our partners to help provide knowledge and information, data, et cetera, on wildlife use in potential conservation easement areas on most properties. And so in this area, there's one ranch, one parcel that is being considered for a conservation easement. We were able to pull pronghorn, mule deer, and elk data to help look at the use and justify if that was an important priority project for funding. Of course, we are using the data extensively for our migration corridor management and our prioritization for some of those designation processes. And we do have some standards and criteria that we follow. And we need to have a minimum of 40 animals collared in an area that we're going to be looking at for considering for the designation process. We also require those collars to be on for a minimum of 3 years. That captures some of that variety that we talked about, annual climatic variation, things like that. Certainly on some years when we have light winters, they might winter in a different place than on those severe winters, and therefore the migration path might look a little different year to year. We do try to collect data points every 2 hours during that migration season. That gives us that fine scale movement that we need to have confidence that we're getting the correct areas drawn out on the map. And then we're certainly using the best analysis methods we can for all of that GPS collar data, frequently partnering with some of the research folks at the Wyoming Migration Initiative, University of Wyoming, and our expertise we have in-house as well. I just wanted to talk really briefly about the executive order, and I apologize right out of the gate, that date is not correct. It should be 2020, not 2022 that's on there. And the governor was able to, of course, put this executive order in place to give us some protections for mule deer and antelope migration corridors. We use this as a very important direction for the department with a lot of our commenting, a lot of our land use planning. It also has a lot of specifics about our designation process that we will be going through for future corridor designations. We have a very specific project review process that's outlined through that executive order for all those projects that could be occurring in our corridors throughout the state. An important component of this to keep in mind is that private land is not restricted by the executive order. There's a lot of opportunity for voluntary work from our private landowners, but there's not the restrictions put in place on our private land that we have in some places on public land through the executive order. And this executive order did designate the 3 corridors that this commission already previously designated. It kind of grandfathered them in under the new header, if you would, of the executive order. So the blue corridor is the sublet mule deer migration corridor. The yellow is the Platte Valley, and the purple is the Baggs mule deer migration corridor. So all 3 of those have been moved forward, the same that the commission had already previously designated. So this I can see is not going to be helpful and very legible at the scale you have it provided to you. So if anyone wants this provided later, we're happy to do that without a doubt. But there is a very specific designation process, as I mentioned, outlined in the executive order. And the department will be following this with future opportunities to designate new corridors. There's a lot of opportunity for public input throughout. And I guess I'll just really quickly walk through the first component of that is the data analysis. That's really the foundation, the science. We got to make sure to get that right. And when it comes to, for example, pronghorn, they use the landscape and migrate a little differently than mule deer. So we're working really carefully on that data analysis process right now to make sure we get it right for pronghorn. That step right there is kind of the science and the data right up front. And then we'll involve the public process for evaluating a threat evaluation that our regional personnel will complete. It's kind of a quick and dirty summary, if you would, of each corridor that's going to be pushed through this process. It'll outline the protections and the threats or the risks to the corridor and really help inform whether a designation is an important process to undergo. The two components or the two processes that could move forward out of that would be identifying the corridor or pursuing the designation process. And the commission would make that recommendation after the department presents that threat evaluation to you. And if it's chosen to identify the corridor, that's still a very important step. It gets those polygons out there in the public, in the hands of our landowners and land managers to make good decisions. So if that's the final stop for a corridor, so be it. But if the decision is made to move forward in the designation process, then the department would be drafting a risk assessment, a biological risk and opportunity assessment, which we would bring forward to the commission with a recommendation to you, whether we believe pursuing that designation is appropriate or not after doing a thorough evaluation. During that step, we also look at bottlenecks and other components of the corridor in more detail than we do before that. At that point, it would be the commission's decision whether you recommend the corridor be advanced to the governor with a recommendation to designate it or not. And the way we are functioning now under the executive order, the governor has that decision authority to go ahead and designate a corridor or not. So hopefully we'll be able to move into these steps. We're anticipating with the sublet pronghorn herd, likely will be the next herd that we bring to you folks. And we'll be able to kind of remind you of this process as we get to that point. Nick.
Well, fortunately, we don't have to have an executive order designation process for fish. Mother Nature took care of that for us. But what there is, this got mixed up here. What there is, though, is a large need to address infrastructure on our waterways to improve them for fish migration and for our own use. A lot of this infrastructure's in bad shape. You know, the concrete 75, 100 years old. We have diversions that have everything, including the kitchen sink in there to help get water over to their diversion. We got culverts in there that were put in without a lot of thought on how it impacts the stream or the biological community. So there's definitely a lot of work out there, and it kind of made an opportune time to establish an official program in the department back in 2009 to focus on fish passage. So I'm gonna hop back here, quick little timeline. So there was a lot of work done in 2005 to put on a passage workshop, and that really spearheaded and got a little momentum going for the department on fish passage. And then in 2009, the program became official with an official budget. In 2010, one of the regional aquatic habitat biologists was converted to a fish passage coordinator, which is the position I'm in. And then 7 years later, 2017, we converted a 12-month AWAC that had been on board since 2009 into a permanent fish passage biologist position. And then today we just the same two folks, and we've been able to add a seasonal that helps with some of that data collection in the field season. So here's a little bit of some numbers on our program. So over the last 3 years, our average budget's about 250,000. A small chunk of that goes to the monitoring and maintenance gear, you know, those pit tags and entrainment nets. But a large chunk of it goes to grants to partners like Trout Unlimited and conservation districts, as well as to using in our own contracts for engineering and construction. Over the last 5 years, kind of our 5-year average out of our latest statewide habitat plan, we've been doing projects that ultimately end up reconnecting or improving access to about 52 miles. We've inventoried 51 structures. That's looking at road crossings or irrigation diversions. Installed 10 structures that can improve passage, and conducted 4 entrainment studies. Here's a map of our passage priority areas out of our statewide habitat plan. A lot of the 2 main data sets behind this is where we have our native cutthroat. So a lot of that western side of the state, all those blue lines. And then a lot of the lines on the east side of states where we have lots of SGCN, so species of greatest conservation need, where we have some high densities and a lot of different species. So those are 2 of the main data sets behind where, we kind of focus our efforts on improving passage. Since the beginning of the program in 2009, there's been a steady effort to inventory sites across the state, inventory diversions and road crossings to try to get an idea of, knowing how much work we have out there and where we can spend our money to get the biggest bang for the buck. So we started collecting this information using the old-fashioned pen and paper. And here lately I've been migrated to the Survey 123 app, where we can take out a phone or a tablet, you enter this stuff, and then it goes into this database that has just come online here in the last couple of years. So we've been collecting all that inventory data and didn't really, it just kind of got stored away in an internal database and didn't really have a good way to utilize that until here just in 2020. The Fish and Wildlife Service put money into a pot to build out a fish passage prioritization tool for the Intermountain West states, similar to efforts they've done in other regions of the country, specifically the Southeast and Northeast of the US. So basically what that gave us an excellent spot. We could hand over all this data to them. And then they also grabbed data from federal agencies, state engineer's office, road and bridge folks, and tried to get all this into one spot where we can start using it as a tool to prioritize where we should do where we should go next. So here's just a screenshot of what specific to roads on what this tool can kick out. So based on all the data that was input, there's about 65,000 road related potential barriers out there. Going out and inventorying some of these sites, some of them aren't connected really to a perennial waterway, so it doesn't going to have much impact to passage. But I guess that gives you the kind of the breadth of potential issues that could be out there. Of those 65,000, only about 1,000 have been assessed for impacts to passage. And out of those 1,000 that have been feet on the eyes on the ground, about 487 of those are likely to impact passage at some level. So here's a map of those 1,000 or so sites that have been assessed. You'll notice most of it's on up in the mountains on Forest Service land. Forest Service went through a pretty significant effort in the mid 2000s to collect that information on all their on their managed land. So we got a big chunk of the state that we're trying to fill in out on the BLM and more on the private side. And so that's what we'll be working on definitely over the next several years. I want to jump into kind of some more of the fun stuff here. Highlight some of the projects and types of projects that we've been able to do. We've done a lot of work with roadway crossings, irrigation diversion improvements, and we've been installed things like technical ladders, bypass channels like that Kendrick Dam I showed earlier, and fish screens. And since the mid 2000s, there's been at least over 140 projects done. Of course, all these haven't been strictly led by Game and Fish. It's been partnering with Trout Unlimited, federal agencies, private landowners. And we've been able to improve and reconnect access to nearly 2,000 miles of stream. So that's give you a little context. That's like driving from Casper to LA and back. So that's how much we've improved. I'll just walk through some specific projects that highlight that. This is Horse Creek WHMA south of Jackson. You'll see in June of 2017, we had a big snowpack, and when you have too small of a culvert for the drainage and you have high runoff, that's what kind of outcomes you can see. So we lost half of our crossing there and half our culvert. We did some temporary fixes there in fall of 2017. In June of 2018, there's another photo. You can see how that has scoured below the culvert. It's perched. When you have too small of a culvert, that water comes through like a fire hose during runoff, and it ends up scouring below the culvert and perching it, and it makes it very difficult for fish to get up past that point. So we tore that out here, just finished this project last year. We replaced it with a 24-foot wide bottomless arch culvert. We did a bunch of in-channel work to stabilize the channel there, because there was quite the drop at that road crossing. And the neat thing about this project, it also benefits wildlife. Just upstream of the culvert, there's also irrigation diversion that feeds our WHMA property there. And we combined work there that is going to reduce our long-term maintenance and secure our diversion for the long term there, along with this road crossing. So we opened up 8 miles of habitat and made a better irrigation diversion for the WHMA. Just further downstream on the highway, if you've traveled to Jackson lately, you're probably wondering when they're going to be done. Well, it's getting soon. This is a culvert that was put on Horse Creek on the highway. Prior to this, it was a narrower culvert, 3-sided, a natural bottom. So during high flows, it was pretty tough for fish to make it past there. It was too high velocity. But with this new structure, it's a little bit wider, and you'll notice there's these concrete baffles in the channel there, and that helps us hold sediment there to have a natural bottom. And you also notice there's little walkways on each side. Those were put in to benefit small mammal passage versus trying to cross over the highway. Here's an example of a culvert replacement, West Fork, Long Creek near DuBois on Forest Service land. Prior to the improvement, it was a 6-foot culvert, probably 2-foot perched on the outlet. Pretty tough for a fish to make up past that. There's 5 miles of habitat above this. We got Yellowstone cuts in the drainage. So it was replaced with a 13-foot diameter culvert and embedded. And they also put stream bed material on here too. Rubber baffles. I forgot to bring one of these to give you a better idea of what these look like. But basically, it's a 2 or 3 foot long piece of rubber, about 6 inches high, and they have little notches in them. We first put these out just last year in several culverts in the Laramie range. That the picture on the bottom, both pictures on the bottom there, give you an idea of what it looks like before and then after installation. They're really cheap and easy to install. You take out there is cordless drills and anchors, and you can do about a 50-foot culvert for $1,100. That's quite a bit cheaper than doing a $250,000 replacement. It reduces velocities, at least in the data we collected last year, 70 to 85%. Increased your depths 2-3 times, and we just did another project this past October west of here on Muddy Creek near Evanston, underneath Interstate 80. That's that upper right picture. We had 2 culverts that are almost 400 feet long, and the interstate's about 30 feet above these culverts. So you can imagine if you tore that out and tried to replace it, how costly that would be. We came in here in 2 days' time and installed about 70 of these baffles that should dramatically improve conditions for fish to move up past this crossing. This is a rock ramp down a big creek south of Saratoga. Prior to the work being done here, it was just a concrete weir with a vertical drop. We came in with a bunch of fill and some pretty specific rock dimensions there, and then we grouted it in. So it won't be scoured out or moved. And now basically we can get fish up past that diversion. This has been one of our probably most common treatments across the state. This is in the middle of construction. This is at a irrigation diversion on the Bear River. This is a cross vein or a rock weir. Typically a lot of these landowners, they're having to get out multiple times a year to create these push-up dams, basically using whatever piece of equipment they have, push up the riverbed and to get water over to their head gate. But with putting these structures in that aren't going to move, usually, you avoid that maintenance for the landowner and the water user, and you can create, these in a specific design that fish are able to get up past them and not be impacted. And you also don't have the annual sediment issues that you do every year when that push-up dam gets blown out. And here's that an aerial view of that technical fish ladder on the Wood River that I was talking about with the pit tag data. So this is looking upstream. You can see the ladder on the left side. We partnered with Trout Unlimited and Graybull Valley Irrigation District on this project. They had some irrigation district had some maintenance needs that they'd like to see at the structure to see this thing last a long time in the future, and we wanted to see fish passage here, so we were able to partner and get this completed about a year ago. And this is just as they're finishing up here last December. And so that gives you an overview. So the fish passage is on the left side of the picture, moving up, and all the irrigation infrastructure is on the right. So that way we can, we're not passing fish up just to go back down the irrigation canal. So that's why we kind of keep them separate. Last couple of things I want to touch on here is kind of the death by 1,000 cuts analogy. A good example to illustrate this is Cottonwood Creek over in the east side of the Wyoming range. It's tough to see there, but there's 58 different dots. So that's representing locations of 58 different irrigation diversions. So if you take that over the miles of stream there, that's a diversion about every 2 miles. So when you start thinking of a fish, even if they're moving like some of the data we had early on with 25 miles, they're encountering, 10, 15 of these, every year. So there's a lot of chances for them not to make it up past these, or they're coming back downstream to take a right when they should have stayed left and go down an irrigation canal. So when we start looking at entrainment, it gets hard to, to look at that data and think, well, do we have an issue at this diversion? But when you start adding up a few fish at each diversion, it can really add up. Yeah, I mentioned fish screens and entrainment here just lit again. We have 34 of these across the state since 2005 that have been installed. Most of them are placed in the irrigation ditch and not in the channel itself. So you're not exposing it to the high flows and debris that can come down. But debris management and maintenance are key on these things. They're not a set it and forget it type of system that we've definitely have found out. They take some education to operate effectively. And that schematic there in the bottom right kind of gives you an idea of how, how these kind of function. That's an idea of a horizontal plate. So just think of a metal plate with a bunch of holes punched through it. Water and fish come in, the irrigation water drops through, continues down the canal, and the fish and other water will get routed back to the river. So we have 14 that are on this, the horizontal variety across the state. 13 vertical. So basically just think about that plate instead of sitting flat, it gets set on its edge. And then 5 drum and 2 cone screens. So lastly, I just want to recognize a bunch of partners and funding. A lot of these projects are not cheap by any means. And we wouldn't be able to do this work without that help. And especially want to recognize the private landowners and irrigation districts. A lot of our work on irrigation diversions, we're down on private land. So having their trust and working together with them has been critical to achieving what we have so far.
Continuing in the vein of the great work the department's been doing for migrations, a lot of the projects on the big game side, you've potentially seen in a different context, maybe not under a migration header. but just in the context of the other projects that come across in front of the commission, whether they be trust fund projects, Mule Deer Initiative, or in this case, invasive annual grass funding that the commission's been committing to these projects. The cheatgrass and invasive management work, like I mentioned before, we definitely focus a lot of this in our stopover areas because of the importance of the quality of habitat in those. We also do vegetation treatments, whether it be sagebrush, other rangeland vegetation treatments, or a lot of the work that we do in aspen communities. These are all projects we're doing in the migration corridors, as well as other habitats, to improve the quality of habitat and forage. Fence modifications, we talked about a little bit before. The interest in fence modifications from our partners, including especially the private landowners, has just exponentially grown in the last few years. So lots of opportunity to do good work here. Conservation easements. This is a map on the Upper Green River Basin with the purple or pink polygons being the sublet mule deer migration corridor. And all those green boxes are conservation easements on private land. In my opinion, one of the most important types of conservation work we can do these days because of the perpetual nature of these and the fact that they guarantee that open space that a lot of wildlife need. Let's see, wildlife crossings. Of course, there's always the big sexy overpass, underpass projects that you guys have talked about extensively in recent years, but we are also doing a lot of projects in the right of way that aren't the big glamorous projects like the overpasses and underpasses. We've done a lot of fence modifications for those right-of-way fences. This top photo here is actually where we've installed a paired gate system. And there's 2 gates here that are actually mirrored on the other side of the highway with the same exact structure. And those gates are left open when we don't have livestock in the adjacent pasture. Pretty simple, pretty cheap, and highly effective. And so we're trying to do more and more of these when we don't have the funding to put multi-million-dollar solutions on the ground everywhere. We're looking at some of these types of solutions here. The 2 photos in the bottom are actually from the Bags area. This is a culvert that was, well, 2 culverts that were in an area there that already had a high fence, and our biologists in the area put up trail cameras to see what kind of use we were getting from mule deer. If you read literature and the technical information out there, it says these culverts are too small to pass mule deer. For reference, that is a person right there, that little being. And the data we had from our trail cameras said that deer were using these areas. And so a real simple fix, one day out there with a chainsaw, clearing out some of the really tall sagebrush that was obscuring that visible path through there that encourages our wildlife to use structures like this. We're trying to look at innovative ways to use inexpensive solutions out there to also help with wildlife crossings as well. I definitely want to hit on funding opportunities. I think the fact that Wyoming has been leading the nation in a lot of our science and conservation work in corridors has afforded us some excellent opportunities with federal funding that have been coming into the state. In the last few years, you'll see here these figures, almost $2 million from NIFWIF. That's specific to the big game migration and winter range program that they have. The Partners for Fish and Wildlife program through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and NRCS through the RCPP, which is the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. We've brought in significant funding to the state to do really excellent conservation work on the ground. I will add to this, I believe Director Nesvik mentioned it yesterday, but we did recently receive one of the America the Beautiful grants for specifically for fence modification work. That's going to be targeting both our commission-owned lands across the state and a focus area in Western Wyoming where we have a significant initiative going on right now to do fence work. And that's a pretty exciting award because only about 8% of the funding requests were awarded through that process. So the fact that Wyoming was able to compete for some of that speaks to the work our department's been accomplishing and the reputation we have for getting good work done on the ground. The last one I want to mention, I know you've heard about this program as well, but the USDA partnership that was recently codified with the MOU is going to be bringing significant funding to our private landowners in the state. An extra $16 million coming in this fiscal year to work primarily in 3 programs that are administered through NRCS and the Farm Service Agency. And those are the Conservation Easement Program, EQIP, which in this case will typically go towards fence modifications and invasive annual grass projects, but has some other opportunities as well. And then the Grassland CRP program. And so those are great opportunities that the department's going to be partnering with our USDA partners to sign up private landowners to accomplish some more great work. And with that, we have gotten to the end of the reel. So thank you very much for sticking with us. And Nick and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah. I got a question for each one of you. One is, what would you say to the folks that argue that we already have the science to designate the corridors?
That's a great question. Yes, we have some science. The amount of questions we still have to dig in further and understand in more detail is monumental. We have an extensive list of questions specifically looking at thresholds of, I'm speaking for the big game side of things, but what kind of thresholds of disturbance, what types of disturbance can the different species tolerate? There's a lot of science still in the wildlife crossing world as far as what types of structures are optimal, yet others are still maybe used, different structures that are out there that are something we should be employing. There's an extensive list of research that would benefit us as managers being able to make better decisions and recommendations on the ground. We've kind of only cracked the tip of the iceberg if I were to estimate on amount of knowledge that we still have to gain out there.
So what kind of timeline are we looking at then?
Well, I think it's probably like almost anything in wildlife management. We're just going to always continue to be learning more. The science has been evolving really quickly because the technology of GPS collars and the analysis methods that we have available to us now have just recently kind of come on board. And so we've seen this huge increase in what we can do for the science and the data, if you would. That's just continuing to open more doors moving forward. So I don't think there's ever going to be an end point, but there's a lot of questions that we're hoping in the short term to really try to tackle with a lot of our partners out there. There's, as you know, a lot of the Western states all kind of working together on a lot of this. So we're learning from work that's being done in other states as well. But I anticipate we'll always be trying to continue to learn more so we can do better with our management.
What was it with the governor's emergency order on this? This just placing this on the burner is what we were doing there?
With the executive order?
Yes.
There's a lot of things the governor, I think, wanted to accomplish with that, really prioritizing the decisions that are being made in there for different types of land use. We've got a lot of different issues that are addressed in there, really providing a lot of protections to those vital habitats in the corridors and kind of elevating the conversation in a lot of cases. That review process that we have really, in a lot of cases, just forces a conversation that we probably ought to be having anyways, but it requires the different entities to sit down at the table and find the best solutions that we can out there on a case-by-case basis. That executive order kind of codifies the requirement of that in many cases, which is great for the department. It allows us to generate solutions with migration context in mind. There's just a lot of things that we are also able to, like we mentioned, bringing in some federal funding. I think having the executive order helps with that. People realize that the state of Wyoming is prioritizing migration, and even with having the governor, of course, putting the executive order in kind of codifies that.
I got one more question for Nick. Do we find our fish, that are in the higher stream, do they migrate down into the larger bodies of water in the winter time? Or do they stay relatively, I'm just kind of, you figure in the spring, maybe they go up, but do they, once the weather starts cold, and they start going back down into the lakes?
Yeah, it varies. We have done entrainment, especially for our younger year fish. So, and in some of our Yellowstone cutthroat streams, we notice that late August, month of September, there's just this huge wave of all those like small 2-3 inch fish that are moving out of the tributaries down to the bigger river system. So we have definitely seen that type of movement where they're getting out of, for I don't know what signals them, but if it's ice conditions or anything like that, but they move out of there and down into the bigger river system. So we have definitely seen that. As far as, you know, a lot of the bigger fish, when they're moving up some of those smaller tribs, they don't hang out a long time. They go up and do their thing, and then they get back down to where they came from. At least the information we have on in a few locations.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. President,
Yes.
Joe, where are we at in the pipeline of designating some additional corridors? I know you mentioned one in your Sublette County. Is there several others or others that are in the pipeline, and where are we at with that?
Yeah, so the Sublette Pronghorn migration corridor, which is actually goes all the way from Jackson down to Interstate 80. It's pretty extensive area. That is the one we're focusing most of our effort on the data analysis right now. The Wyoming Range Mule Deer corridor, we've also been starting to look at some of the analysis of our collar data that we have there. We are continuing to collect a lot of other data through a lot of these GPS collar studies that I mentioned, but we've got quite a few that we're still collecting data, or we've maybe completed a collar study and we're starting to work on our analysis. So we don't have definitive timeframes at this point, but we're working hard, particularly on that Sublette Pronghorn is the first one in the hopper, and then Wyoming Range Mule Deer, we're working on some of the analysis with that one as well.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll do a call to the public. Do we have any questions online or anything or in no blue sheets or? No, nobody from the audience? What's that? Okay, thank you. Thanks for this. Very educational. Thank you. We'll go to number 24 on the Wyoming Game Wardens Association update.
President Roberts, Commissioners, Director Nesbitt. My name is Kim Olson, and many of you may recognize me as the Bags Game Warden, but today I am here to represent the Wyoming Game Wardens Association. For those of you who might not know who we are, I hope to introduce you and let you know what we do and what we're about. So a little bit of history. The Game Wardens Association was formed in 1973, and it is comprised of all commissioned wildlife law enforcement officers in the state of Wyoming, as well as retired game wardens. It was formed for providing good fellowship and loyalty to the department, for effectively maintaining our wildlife resources, and for promoting a more efficient way to meet our problems collectively. Over the years, we've been involved with legislative statutes, with department housing, with department policies. We formed a retirement system and many other issues. After about 10 years, we began fundraising. And since 1985, the Wyoming Game Wardens Association has provided financial assistance to various charitable organizations. We have invested in things such as research to improve wildlife law enforcement, kids fishing days, outdoor awareness days, handicapped hunter programs, law enforcement memorials, and numerous other things. Total contributions since 1985 have exceeded $520,000. So today we carry on those traditions and continue to be a voice for the Wyoming Game Warden. We continue to be involved in legislative processes to ensure that laws are law enforcement friendly and continue to protect our Wyoming's wildlife. We continue to be a liaison between game wardens and the department, and we continue to donate to worthy causes through fundraising and commissioner license raffles. The Wyoming Game Wardens Association mission is a bit lengthy, but it can be divided into 5 parts. First, we want to promote and perpetuate the traditions and responsibilities of the Wyoming Game Warden. Second, we continue to advocate for the status of the game warden to remain as a multi-purpose wildlife professional. One of the great things about being a Wyoming game warden is we are a law enforcement professional, a wildlife manager, and a liaison between constituents and the department. Third, we want to honor those who have gone before us. Fourth, we advocate for conservation and youth education through outreach and financial assistance. And finally, we continue to uphold the honor, respect, and reputation of the Wyoming Game Warden through service to wildlife and to people. So for 36 years, we have given out 14 scholarships to graduating high school seniors across the state of Wyoming. These scholarships are now in the amount of $1,000 a piece. They can be used at any school of their choosing and for any topic that they wish to study. And as far as we know, and as far as we are aware, this is the only scholarship program that is fully funded by commissioner license raffle sales. The First Hunt Foundation is an organization that approached us for financial assistance. It is designed to recruit folks into the outdoor world of hunting and fishing. It now covers the entire state with 5 chapters. It has nearly 100 mentors. And it is designed for anyone who is new to the outdoors. However, they do focus primarily on women and youth who might not otherwise have that opportunity. And we are extremely proud to be affiliated with the First Hunt Foundation. Another program that came to us for financial assistance is the Paint Rock Hunter Mentor Program. This program has been in existence for more than 20 years, and it continues to get kids into the outdoors through a variety of programs. They have mentored hunts. They do a compound bow lending program. They do numerous outdoor field day programs in the Bighorn Basin and more. The Wyoming Game Wardens Association has been the primary financial supporter of the rifle mentor hunts. Through our donations, we have provided purchase of the ammunition as well as the doe deer and cow elk licenses for this hunt, as well as the Young Hunters Cares program. We have purchased the licenses for that program as well. And in that one, after the deer are harvested, they are processed and donated back to regional local food banks for distribution. We continue to support youth education through the Outdoor Expo and the Wyoming Outdoors Weekend in Lander. We contact hundreds of youngsters as well as adults during these events, and our Poach Coach is still a fan favorite. These events allow us to contact a broader range of people that we don't normally see. And we've partnered with WOW on several commissioner licenses in the past. Over the years, we have been able to honor those who have gone before us through several different memorials. We placed a plaque in the honoring game wardens Bill Lackinen and Don Simpson, who were killed in the Sierra Madres. We have nearly completed the wall that honors the fallen in the Casper Regional Office. There are still a few details we'd like to add to this, but if you have not had the opportunity, I highly recommend checking this out. And we also have an honor guard that is requested at various memorial services. Another regular funding request that we contribute to is the Wyoming State 4-H Foundation. Of course, this organization has been encouraging youth for decades, and we're glad to assist them. Our support financially assists in the State Shooting Sports Awards. These are only a few of the programs that we help with financially over the years. So as I mentioned at the beginning, The Wyoming Game Wardens Association was founded in 1973. So next year marks our 50th anniversary, 50 years of investing in youth and the future of hunting. We understand that game wardens are oftentimes looked upon as the face of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, and that is not something that we take lightly. We are a proud, dedicated, hardworking group of individuals who have a passion for Wyoming's wildlife. And we believe that one of the ways to continue the legacy of Wyoming's wildlife is to invest in the future of Wyoming's youth. And we couldn't do that without your support. So we thank you very much for that. And we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you for the time and the opportunity.
Thank you.
Does any questions for me?
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Item 25.
Director, President Roberts, members of the commission, thank you so much for having me. Chris McBarnes, President of the Wildlife Fund. For those of you who do not know out there, the Wildlife Fund was created by the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission back in 2019 to help with on-the-ground projects and strategic initiatives of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Kim, I want to say you did an excellent job, and we'll be getting with you right afterwards because we want to get behind your efforts. So excellent job. I will be brief because I know you all need to get to Cody. First, I'm going to talk to you about the Pooled Migration Fund, a very exciting initiative that the Wildlife Fund is going to be a part of. And whoever put the agenda today, Deputy Director Kennedy, excellent putting us behind Jill because it's going to go part and parcel with what Jill talked about. Second, I'm going to talk to you about an exciting new fund called the Judith A. Hossafrost Memorial Fund that's been created within the Wildlife Fund. And finally, we want to give away some more money to department projects here at the end. So the Pooled Migration Fund, and this is again perfect. Jill put it in context, but I want to elaborate on it a little bit more. May 20th of 2022, Yellowstone's celebration of their 150th, USDA Undersecretary Robert Bonney announced a new partnership which uses diverse farm bill investments to support voluntary conservation of private working lands and migratory big game populations in Wyoming. Director Nesvik said, Wyoming leads the nation in our approaches to conserving big game and their movements. We've done that with strong landowner partnerships and an acknowledgement that habitat conservation can be done on multi-use landscapes. And the Wildlife Fund could not agree more. So if you look at the approach to migration in this announcement by Undersecretary Robert Bonney as a stool with 3 legs, you have the federal component, you have the state component, which you folks are doing so much per Jill's presentation, and there should be a private leg to that stool as well. And so the Wildlife Fund, with the help of Director Nesvik, Dr. Arthur Middleton, and others, set out to establish that private leg of the stool. So I'm proud to announce in the past 4 months, we've been successful in raising $1.3 million through the Hewlett Foundation, the Band Foundation, and the Wilberforce Foundation to create the Pooled Migration Fund to accentuate these state and federal efforts to get even more done in these key migration corridors in our state. So the Wildlife Fund's Pooled Migration Fund aligns directly with the department's vision. And so we'll be focusing on the Baggs Mule Deer Migration Corridor with these funds, the Platte Valley Mule Deer Migration Corridor, Sublet Mule Deer Migration Corridor, and the Absaroka Front, i.e. the Cody area. So the central pillar of this project and the Wildlife Fund putting these dollars on the ground will be to grow the proven track record Wyoming has of advancing and prioritizing migration initiatives through voluntary conservation efforts. And fundamental to this mission is synergizing willing landowners to join these efforts. Our private ranchers, our stock growers, they do so much for our wildlife. And through this fund, we hope to incentivize them even more to continue this good work in these key corridors. So our first request for proposals to put dollars on the ground is going to be going out on December 1st. So I encourage NGOs, tribal partners to keep an eye on the Wildlife Fund website. This first round of funding will focus on FTE positions with a target on helping landowners navigate federal grant processes and building out project pipelines in those previous geographic target areas. And as Jill mentioned, the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program, or ASEP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, and the Grassland CRP program is receiving significant upscaled funding through this initiative from the Undersecretary. And our program will be meant to help get these funds on the ground efficiently and effectively, and where they go along with the department's strategic vision and mission in these corridors. So we're very excited about this. In order to do this properly, we're building out an expert grants advisory panel that will be led by members of the department. I've been working with Chief Rick King and Director Nesvik on identifying who those individuals should be. So those individuals will be help vetting and picking through every grant application we receive to make sure that the dollars we're putting on the ground in these corridors line up directly with what the department and the commission think is most important for big game migration movements across Wyoming. And again, I'll just reiterate, NGOs, tribal partners, keep an eye out for that RFP, and then down the road, we'll have additional RFPs. And it's the Wildlife Fund's goal to grow the Pooled Migration Fund. $1.3 million is a significant amount of money, but it doesn't go that far when you're talking about tackling these big problems. We're thankful to our initial funders, but we're going to keep on hammering to grow this in the future. And I think it will be absolutely terrific. Director Nesvik, you've been absolutely essential in helping put the Wildlife Fund in this position. Would you like to add anything, sir?
Sure, it's a great opportunity, and I think you described it very well, Chris, with specifically what the Wildlife Fund's role here is. I think that as we talked early on, one of the hurdles that we identified is exactly the federal process. The grant application process is difficult, and so I think this is going to be a great opportunity. I think that the fact that these private donors have identified this as one of their priorities and their way to contribute is really important. And my hat's off to the Wildlife Fund for getting this going so quick. I mean, it's just a few months and you've raised 1.3 million.
Yeah, and hopefully we hope to have our first checks on the ground and announced in January. So we have a really quick turnaround time for this RFP, but there's work to be done, and the call for all these big programs through USDA and NRCS are coming up and happening now. So that is the Pooled Migration Fund. Secondly, I'm honored to announce today the establishment of the Judith Ann Hossafrost Memorial Fund within the Wildlife Fund. You might remember me talking to you at a previous commission meeting in Cody that we had over 20 individuals that donated in Judith's memory to the Wildlife Fund. I've been working with Judith's longtime partner, Reg Rothwell, to establish this memorial fund. And just as a reminder, Judith was a 40-year department employee of Wyoming Game and Fish, and she passed away on Christmas Day of 2021. I'm sad that I never got the chance to meet Judith in person, but working with Reg over these past months, I feel like I know Judith, and this fund is all about her memory. And so what Reg has done is he's making $5,000 available immediately, and those funds are going to go to help intra-department employees that are part of the Wyoming Wildlife Magazine staff go to annual conferences, the Association of Conservation Information that Judy was very passionate about and was a president of during her time with the department, and help them engage further with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department Youth Summer Camp. And also, along with that $5,000, Reg is making a significant contribution to the Wildlife Fund that will be invested and will be an annuity and an endowment that will roll off monies annually to help department employees plug in and live on in Judy's memory. So I want to tip my cap to Reg and tip my cap to Judy, an incredible lady. And Reg wanted people to know that if others want to honor someone's memory from Game and Fish like he has, we here at the Wildlife Fund want to help make that happen. And that's what we're here to do. And thank you to Meredith Wood. She was integral in helping me set up this process. So Meredith, thank you so much for helping me along the way. And finally, we want to give away some money, some hard-earned money through fundraising. So I want to acknowledge one of our directors of our board, Taylor Phillips. Of course, Taylor has helped us kick off this initiative, Wildlife Tourism for Tomorrow, dipping into the tourism sector to bring more resources to bear for wildlife. We are going through a big rebranding process of that signature program right now. But we have some money we want to put on the ground, and that's what the Wildlife Fund's about, putting meaningful dollars on the ground to advance conservation wildlife in Wyoming. So Taylor.
Hello, President, Commissioners, Director. Thanks for the opportunity for a little Wildlife Tourism for Tomorrow update. A few projects to chat about here in a minute, but just to let everyone know, gosh, we've seen incredible success with this movement. Over 85 businesses have financially supported this initiative. We've raised over $186,000 in this short amount of time. So we've proven the concept. Now we are kind of fine tuning things a little bit through kind of some rebranding work. We want to make sure that we're aligned with the department, that we're supporting the fund, the department, not promoting tourism. And, any commissioners or anyone within the department, if you guys have other questions about this process and where we're at, Chris and I would be happy to chat with anyone. But yeah, a few projects to chat on. One New Fork River restoration, $25,000 that we have captured for that project. It's a section of the New Fork River below Pinedale, where this is a game and fish project, and we're focused there. The department is focused on habitat restoration, stream break restoration. Gosh, one of my favorite projects here in this list is the South Park Wetlands Enhancement. That's on the South Park WHMA, and the project just recently completed. We've injected $25,000 into that project. Ducks Unlimited, the project lead, but of course, Game and Fish is directly involved with that project, where there's a creation of multiple wetland cells that will be ephemeral wetlands spring and fall. Will promote great waterfowl habitat, vegetation for kind of wintering elk as well. Another great project just north of there, Kelly Hayfield's restoration in Grand Teton National Park. The Grand Teton National Park Foundation is kind of spearheading this project. On the funding side of things, it's a multi-year project, and they certainly significantly need money for this. So we're happy to inject $25,000 into that project. And we're excited about the Cody Regional Beaver Holding Facility as well. And we've got a great partner. We reached out to Wyoming Untrapped on this, saying, hey, Wyoming Untrapped, we have, about $9,000. Would you like to match that? And they agreed to be a partner on that project as well. And we're excited. Jenny DeSaro, the executive director from Wyoming Untrapped, she should be available to make a couple comments online. Do you guys have Jenny? She said she was gonna say a couple of words. Correct. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
But yeah, they've been great partners, and we're
Oh.
excited about this holding facility because it will enable department personnel to capture, we'll call them problem beavers over a larger period of time, and then reintroduce or relocate these beavers. It's always much more effective to release entire colonies versus individual beavers. So the idea is, okay, we have a holding facility. Over the course of a couple of weeks' time, we can capture all the members of the colony and then release them as a whole unit.
Can you hear me?
Oh, Jenny, yes. We got you.
Yeah, sorry. And I'm not sure why the video isn't showing, but thank you very much can I interrupt you now? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, go for it, Jenny. You're great.
Okay. So thank you, President Roberts, Director Nesbitt, members of the commission. I am on day 10 of being the executive director of Wyoming Untrapped. So I appreciate this quick opportunity to introduce myself and let you all know that we are delighted to be partnering with Wildlife Tourism for Tomorrow and the Wyoming Game and Fish Department for the future management of beaver, a keystone species. This project aligns with our beaver coexistence work, helping landowners protect their trees and culverts, installing flow devices, as well as promoting education via our Dam Cam video project. So if you have some free time one evening, it's worth checking those videos out. And we do look forward to future collaboration opportunities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny, for joining us here remotely. So we're, all the projects that we choose to support are all these projects have been vetted by the department. We run all project ideas by regional supervisors, and then these projects are run by the Wildlife Fund Board. And and I ask commissioners, director, leadership here in the department, like if there are projects where funding is short, like please reach out to Chris and I, to look at these projects, because we're currently looking for projects all across the state as we kind of move across the state to enlarge the reach of wildlife tourism for tomorrow. So thanks for the opportunity. We're super excited for this initiative, and the future is bright. Any questions?
No, I got it. Thanks.
Well, commissioners, thank you. So today we've talked to you about an exciting initiative with the Pooled Migration Fund, the establishment of the Judith A. Hossafrost Memorial Fund, and of course, more money on the ground through our signature program. So the future's bright. I'll leave you with this. The work the Wildlife Fund is doing, we are really striving to make the work on the ground by the hardworking people of this department easier, to take burdens off of them and help them even do a more stellar job, which they do an incredible job as is. So with that, President, thank you for the opportunity, and I'll stand for questions.
I don't have a question. I just want to thank you guys for all your hard work. I do want to say, we've been trying to get non-traditional partners. Taylor's done an excellent job trying to get the tourism industry, and Lord knows we have some issues with Wyoming Untrapped, and we don't agree on a lot of issues, but it's nice to see them contributing in an area that we can all agree on in helping Wyoming's wildlife. So I'd like to encourage other people to come on board as well, to where on issues we agree on.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. At this time, I'll open it up to a call to the public. If there's anything out there from the public in the audience or on the video that needs to be addressed, this is the time to do so. Hearing none at this point, then I'll entertain motions for us to adjourn. Mr. Jolovich? Commissioner Jolovich has made the motion to adjourn. Commissioner Ladwig has seconded. It's all those in favor.
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned. Thanks.
Yeah.